Welcome. I'm Magnus, and I bring you horror stories to help you relax, or maybe to keep you up at night. Tell us where you're from. Are there spooky forests nearby? If you're a fan of scary stories, subscribe and drop a like. Get cozy, and let's begin. My name is Marcus Whitley, 34 years old, and I've lived in Portland my whole life. Working as a wildlife photographer gives me the perfect excuse to escape the city whenever I need to clear my head. This time, I convinced my cousin Elijah and his girlfriend Tara to join me on a camping trip to the remote wilderness of Nevada's Ruby Mountains. Elijah had been talking about proposing to Tara, and I thought this would be the perfect backdrop: pristine forests, crystal clear lakes, and endless stars. What none of us knew was that something ancient and terrifying prowled those mountains. We arrived at our destination after a grueling 8-hour drive in my weathered Jeep Cherokee. The late September air carried a chill that bit through our light jackets as we unloaded our gear. "You sure picked one hell of a remote spot, Marcus," Elijah muttered, surveying the dense pines surrounding our campsite. I smiled, breathing in the scent of pine and earth. This was exactly what I needed after 6 months of corporate photography gigs in stuffy studios. Tara seemed uneasy from the moment we arrived, constantly glancing over her shoulder at the thick forest line. "I keep feeling like something's watching us," she whispered while helping me set up the tent. I laughed it off, blaming her city sensibilities, but there was something in her eyes that gave me pause, a primal fear that I couldn't quite dismiss. That first evening around the campfire was perfect. We roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and Elijah pulled out a bottle of whiskey that warmed us from the inside. The stars above Nevada's wilderness blazed with an intensity you never see in Portland, forming constellations that seemed almost foreign in their clarity. I remember thinking how peaceful everything was, how disconnected from the chaos of modern life. The first strange occurrence happened just after midnight. We were all tucked into our sleeping bags, the embers of our fires still glowing faintly outside the tents, when a howl echoed through the mountains. Not a wolf or coyote, something deeper, more guttural, almost human but impossibly powerful. We all heard it. Elijah whispered that it was probably just the wind echoing through the canyons, but I'd spent enough time in the wilderness to know better. Morning brought no signs of disturbance, and I convinced myself that we'd imagined the whole thing. Tara seemed less certain, picking at her breakfast and repeatedly scanning the tree-line. "You know what they say about these mountains," she said quietly, her coffee untouched. The Shoshone had legends about a tall creature they called Zoovitz, a cannibal giant that lived in the high country. Elijah rolled his eyes, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. We spent the day hiking to Lamoille Lake, a stunning alpine body of water nestled between towering peaks. I brought my camera, snapping photos of the rugged landscape and my companions. Looking back at those images now makes my stomach turn, especially the ones where, just at the edge of the frame, the tree line shows signs of disturbance that none of us noticed at the time. That night, I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps circling our campsite. The footfalls were deliberate, methodical, and far too heavy to belong to any normal hiker. Each step was followed by the cracking of branches that sounded like gunshots in the still night air. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, as whatever it was completed a full circuit around our tents before retreating into the forest. As dawn broke, I unzipped my tent with trembling hands and stepped outside. The morning mist hung low over our campsite, but even through the haze, I could see them. Footprints, each nearly 18 inches long, pressed deep into the soft earth in a perfect circle around our tents. When Elijah and Tara emerged, their faces went pale at the sight. "We need to leave," Tara whispered, her voice breaking. "Now." But when we turned toward the Jeep, we discovered our first real problem. All 4 tires had been slashed to ribbons, not with a knife, but with something that looked disturbingly like claws. With our only means of escape sabotaged, panic set in quickly. Elijah paced around the Jeep, frantically checking his phone for signal. "Nothing," he growled, shoving the useless device back into his pocket. Not a single bar. The Ruby Mountains had never felt so isolated, so dangerously far from civilization. Tara sat on a fallen log, her face buried in her hands, shoulders trembling. I tried to maintain some semblance of calm as I assessed our options. "The ranger station," I finally said, breaking the tense silence. It's about 15 miles northeast of here. We can hike there, get help." Neither of them looked thrilled at the prospect of trekking through these woods, not after what we'd discovered. But what choice did we have? We packed only the essentials: water, energy bars, my camera, force of habit, and a hunting knife Elijah had brought along. As we prepared to leave, Tara froze suddenly, pointing to something carved into a nearby pine. Fresh marks gouged the bark, forming crude but unmistakable symbols that resembled no language I'd ever seen. "It's marking territory," she whispered, "just like bears do." But these weren't bear claw marks. They were deliberate, patterned, intelligent. The hike was nerve-wracking. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every distant bird call had us scanning the tree-line. About 3 miles in, we found the first clear evidence that we were being stalked. Massive footprints, identical to those around our camp, paralleled our trail about 50 yards to the west, occasionally disappearing only to reappear further ahead. Whatever it was keeping pace with us, watching us. We reached a small clearing around midday and paused to rest. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly, a stark contrast to the cold dread pooling in my stomach. Elijah took a long drink from his water bottle and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I don't think we're alone out here," he said, stating what we all knew but had been afraid to verbalize. "I keep seeing movement in the trees, just at the corner of my eye." The smell hit us first as we continued our journey, a powerful, musky odor like wet fur and decaying meat. Then came the sounds, wood knocking against wood, rhythmic and unnatural, communicating something we couldn't understand. We quickened our pace, nearly jogging now despite our exhaustion. Tara stumbled over a root, scraping her palm as she caught herself. The small trickle of blood seemed abnormally bright against her pale skin. As dusk approached, we faced a difficult decision. Continuing through the mountains at night seemed suicidal, but stopping to make camp felt equally dangerous. We found a defensible position, a small outcropping of rocks that offered shelter on 3 sides, and decided to wait until morning. None of us spoke much as darkness fell. We'd seen enough, heard enough, to know that the legends had substance. Something was hunting us through these ancient mountains. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by distant howls that seemed to be closing in. Around 3 a.m., Elijah shook me awake, his eyes wide with terror. "Listen," he hissed. I strained my ears and heard it. Heavy breathing, just beyond our little rock shelter. Not animal panting, but deep, deliberate breaths. Almost human, but too resonant, too powerful. We huddled together, hardly daring to move, as the breathing continued for nearly an hour before slowly fading away. Dawn revealed a disturbing discovery. All around our shelter, pressed into the soft earth, were those same massive footprints. But more terrifying were the 5 dead rabbits, arranged in a perfect pentagon around our camp, each one torn apart not by teeth or claws, but by hands strong enough to pull limbs from sockets. It was a message or a warning, and beside this grisly display lay a single pine branch, stripped of bark and carefully sharpened to a deadly point. The only possible conclusion sent shivers down my spine. It was learning, watching, adapting to us. And now it had a weapon. There was no more pretending, no more rationalizing away what was happening. Something intelligent and dangerous was stalking us through the Nevada wilderness, something that matched every description of Bigfoot I'd ever heard, and worse. "We need to move," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Now, we gathered our things with shaking hands, abandoning anything not absolutely essential. Speed was our only ally now. The morning mist clung to the forest floor as we set out, creating spectral shapes that had us constantly on edge. Every shadow concealed potential danger. Every sound signaled possible attack. About 2 miles into our trek, Elijah spotted something through the trees, a small, abandoned-looking cabin with a rusted pickup truck parked outside. Hope surged through me. Maybe the truck would work. Maybe there was a radio inside. Maybe we could actually survive this nightmare. Our optimism was short-lived. The cabin door hung open, splintered from its hinges by something impossibly strong. Inside, furniture lay overturned, shattered. Blood, days old but unmistakable, stained the rough wooden floorboards. On the walls, someone had frantically scrawled warnings. "IT mimics voices, and don't look in IT's eyes." The truck's engine had been ripped out, components scattered across the ground like discarded toys. We were not this creature's first victims. We found a map pinned to the cabin wall, showing our location relative to the ranger station, still 10 miles away, across increasingly rugged terrain. But the map revealed something else, something the previous occupant had marked with trembling hands: a series of caves in the mountainside, labeled simply ITS Home. With growing horror, I realized we'd been heading straight toward those caves, unknowingly walking into its territory. Tara discovered a journal beside an overturned chair, its pages filled with increasingly desperate entries. The writer, a hunter named Samuel, had been tracking what he thought was an unusually large bear, only to discover something far more terrifying. His final entry, barely legible, described the creature's ability to mimic human voices, to lure prey by calling out in familiar tones. "It knows my name," he'd written. "It calls to me using Ashley's voice, my dead wife's voice." We left the cabin more frightened than before, but with a new plan: avoid the caves, circle wide around the mountain, and approach the ranger station from the south. We'd barely made it half a mile when the first rocks began to fall, small at first, then larger, bouncing down the hillside toward us. Looking up, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving along the ridgeline, deliberately loosening stones, herding us like cattle. It was forcing us back toward the path to the caves. The forest grew denser, darker, as we were pushed further off our intended route. The trees here were ancient, their canopy blocking most of the sunlight. Strange structures appeared among them, stick figures hanging from branches, bones and antlers arranged in patterns that made my skin crawl. We were entering its territory, its hunting ground. Tara gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Marcus," she whispered, "do you hear that?" Through the trees came a child's laughter, light and innocent, and completely impossible this far into the wilderness. Then the voices started, first distant, then closer. Hikers calling for help, a woman crying, a man shouting warnings. All around us, moving, circling. Elijah covered his ears, repeating, "It's not real," like a mantra. Tara stumbled to her knees when she heard her mother's voice calling her name from the shadows. I knew it was the creature, using its uncanny ability to mimic, to confuse and terrify us. But knowing didn't make it less effective. The attack came suddenly, brutally. A massive boulder crashed through the trees just inches from where I stood. Then another, closer still. We ran blindly, abandoning any semblance of a plan. The pursuit was audible now. Heavy footfalls, branches snapping, that same deep, guttural breathing. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of our hunter. 8 feet tall at least, covered in matted dark fur, moving with a speed that defied its size. Its eyes, when they briefly met mine, held an intelligence that froze my blood. Not animal, not quite human, but something ancient and calculating. And then I realized with sickening clarity, it wasn't just stalking us. It was playing with us. We crashed through the underbrush, adrenaline masking our exhaustion. Elijah led the way, machete in hand, cutting a path through the dense vegetation. Behind us, the creature kept pace effortlessly, sometimes drawing closer, sometimes falling back, but always there, always watching. It was toying with us, gauging our strengths and weaknesses, learning our patterns. The worst part was its patience. It knew we couldn't maintain this pace forever. It could wait. A ravine appeared suddenly before us, too wide to jump, too deep to quickly descend and climb. We followed its edge desperately, searching for a crossing. The delay cost us precious time and distance. When we finally found a fallen tree creating a natural bridge, the creature was close enough that I could smell its distinctive odor, that powerful musk that seemed to seep into my clothes, my skin, my lungs. Tara crossed first, moving carefully on the slippery trunk. Elijah followed. I was halfway across when a deafening roar echoed through the canyon, so powerful it seemed to vibrate the very air. Startled, my foot slipped. I tumbled sideways, barely catching the log with one hand, my body dangling over the 30-foot drop to the rocky streambed below. Elijah rushed back, grabbing my wrist, pulling me up with strength born of desperation. As my feet found purchase again, I looked back to see the creature standing at the ravine edge, watching us with those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. Instead of finding a way across, It simply turned and disappeared into the forest. The momentary relief was undercut by a chilling realization. It wasn't giving up. It was circling around, cutting us off. We had to move, had to find shelter before it intercepted our path. The terrain grew steeper as we climbed, lungs burning, muscles screaming in protest. The Nevada sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in oranges and reds that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. We reached a rocky plateau just as dusk was settling in. From this vantage point, we could see for miles, the endless Nevada wilderness stretching in all directions. No signs of civilization, no prospect of rescue. But more immediately concerning was the network of caves dotting the mountainside below us. We'd inadvertently done exactly what the creature wanted. We'd entered its domain. And somewhere in that labyrinth of dark passages, it was waiting. Night fell with terrifying speed, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that had us huddling together for warmth. We couldn't risk a fire, not with the creature so close. Our water was running low, our food nearly gone. Exhaustion and fear had made us careless, sloppy. We'd lost our bearings, and I was no longer certain which direction would lead us to the ranger station. We were truly lost in every sense of the word. Around midnight, the psychological warfare began again. Voices called from the darkness, some begging for help, others warning of danger, still others mimicking our own voices with perfect accuracy. Most disturbing were the sounds of children playing, laughing, completely incongruous in this wilderness. "Don't listen," I hissed as Tara began instinctively moving toward a woman's cries. It's how it hunts. But the constant barrage was wearing on our already frayed nerves. Our brief rest ended with the sound of heavy stones shifting below us. The creature was climbing toward our position, no longer bothering to conceal its approach. We scrambled to our feet, searching for an escape route. The plateau offered only one path forward, a narrow trail leading higher up the mountain. With no other options, we began to climb, using our phone flashlights to illuminate the treacherous path. The trail led to a small cave opening, barely visible in the darkness. Normally, entering a confined space would be the last thing we'd do, but a sudden, violent thunderstorm left us no choice. Lightning split the sky as we huddled just inside the entrance, illuminating the landscape in harsh, blue-white flashes. And in one of those flashes, we saw it, standing in the rain less than 50 yards away, staring directly at our hiding place. Its massive silhouette was unmistakable, primeval, a nightmare made flesh. The lightning faded, plunging everything back into darkness. When the next flash came seconds later, the creature was gone. But we all knew with sick certainty. It knew exactly where we were. And it was coming. The cave proved both our salvation and our doom. Its narrow entrance made it defensible. Only one way in, easily monitored. But it also made us trapped, cornered prey with nowhere to run. We pushed deeper into the passage, desperate for some alternative exit. Our phone lights cast weak, flickering beams through the darkness, batteries draining rapidly. The air grew colder, damper as we descended, carrying that same musky scent that had been haunting us for days. The passage widened suddenly into a larger chamber, and our lights reflected off something pale scattered across the ground. Bones. Hundreds of them, animal and human alike, some ancient and yellowed, others disturbingly fresh. This was its larder, its trophy room. Among the remains, we found backpacks, cameras, clothing, evidence of other hikers, other victims who had never made it out of these mountains. Tara stifled a scream when she discovered a child's stuffed bear, matted with dried blood. Elijah found another passage leading from the chamber, heading roughly east. This might connect to another exit, he whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. It was a desperate gamble, but our only option. As we prepared to continue, a low, rumbling growl reverberated through the cave. The creature had entered the tunnel behind us, cutting off our retreat. Its massive form blocked what little light had filtered in from the entrance. We were trapped in its lair, exactly where it had been hurting us all along. We fled deeper into the tunnel network, navigating by touch as our last phone died. Complete darkness enveloped us, primordial and absolute. Every sound echoed confusingly, water dripping, our own panicked breathing, and always those heavy footsteps. Sometimes they seemed to come from ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes impossibly from above. The creature knew these caves intimately. We were stumbling blindly through its home. In the darkness, we became separated. One moment Elijah was beside me, the next he was gone. His screams echoed through the tunnels seconds later, raw, agonized sounds that no human should ever make. Tara gripped my hand so tightly I felt bones grind together. We pressed forward, driven by pure animal terror, no longer thinking, just moving, fleeing. The passage sloped upward, giving us a desperate flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it led to the surface. We emerged into faint pre-dawn light, the exit concealed behind a cascade of water, a small waterfall flowing over the cave mouth. For one brief, beautiful moment, I thought we might survive. The forest stretched before us, misty in the early light. Somewhere beyond those trees lay civilization, safety. Then Tara's hand was ripped from mine with such force that I was thrown to the ground. Her scream was cut short with a sickening finality. I ran blindly through the trees, branches whipping my face, tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I heard the creature's pursuit, not rushed, not frantic, but methodical, inexorable. It knew I couldn't escape. It was just a matter of time. The forest began to thin, and ahead I saw what looked like a dirt road. My legs found new strength, propelling me forward with the last reserves of my energy. If I could reach that road, maybe a ranger or a hiker would find me. Maybe I could still survive this nightmare. It was a fatal mistake. What I'd thought was a road was actually a wide clearing, created not by humans, but by the creature itself. As I broke through the tree line, I saw them. 3 more of the massive, fur-covered beings, gathered around a crude stone altar. Upon it lay the remains of Elijah, his body arranged in a ritualistic display that will haunt me until my dying day. They turned as one to look at me, their eyes reflecting the rising sun with an eerie, reddish glow. The last thing I remember clearly is running again, mindlessly, in no particular direction. At some point, I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, my body bouncing off rocks and trees. Pain exploded through my right leg as it twisted unnaturally beneath me. I lay at the bottom, unable to move, waiting for the end. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. No pursuit came. Perhaps they thought the fall had killed me. Perhaps they were watching still, waiting for night to claim their prize. As darkness fell, I dragged myself along the ground, centimeter by agonizing centimeter. I have no memory of how long I crawled or in what direction. The park ranger who found me 3 days later said I was nearly 20 miles from our original campsite, severely dehydrated, delirious with pain and fever from my infected wounds. He said I was lucky to be alive. I didn't tell him about the creatures. Who would believe such a story? The official report listed Elijah and Tara as missing, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. I returned to Portland, to safety, to civilization. But sleep eludes me now. Every night, I hear those voices, sometimes Elijah's, sometimes Tara's, calling to me from the darkness. And sometimes, when I look out my apartment window at night, I see a large shadow watching from the tree line across the street. Waiting, patient. It followed me home, and sooner or later, it will come for me. My name is Vanessa Delgado, 29 years old, born and raised in Seattle where I work as an ethnographer specializing in indigenous cultures. I've always been fascinated by the stories people tell about their lands, the legends that persist through generations despite our modern skepticism. That fascination is what brought me to Nevada's Great Basin, along with my research assistant Miko and my older brother Dominic. We'd come to document oral histories from tribes in the region, focusing on supernatural entities in their folklore. The irony of what happened isn't lost on me. We went looking for stories and became one instead. The drive from Seattle had been long but beautiful, Dominic's ancient Bronco handling the terrain better than I'd expected. He'd taken time off from his contractor job to join us, claiming he needed a vacation, but I knew he was really there to keep an eye on me. Ever since my divorce last year, he'd appointed himself my personal guardian. Miko, fresh out of grad school with an enthusiastic gleam in her eyes, had spent most of the journey recording our conversations, practicing for the interviews to come. We set up camp near a remote area outside of Ely, Nevada, a place where the sagebrush stretched endlessly under vast blue skies. The landscape had a haunting beauty, desolate yet alive in ways city dwellers rarely notice. Our first evening, we sat around the campfire while Miko reviewed her notes on Paiute and Shoshone legends. The Skinwalker stories are particularly disturbing, she said, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. Shapeshifters who were once human but gave up their humanity for terrible powers. Dominic laughed, poking at the fire with a stick. Just stories to keep kids from wandering off at night, he said with the confidence of someone who'd never felt truly afraid in the wilderness. I wasn't so sure. Throughout my career, I'd found that persistent legends often contained kernels of truth, warnings passed down through generations about very real dangers, even if wrapped in supernatural dressing. That night, I dreamed of running across the desert floor, my body moving with inhuman speed, the scent of prey filling my nostrils. I woke drenched in sweat despite the cool desert air, a strange taste like copper pennies lingering in my mouth. Outside my tent, something skittered across the ground, too quick to be seen, just a flash of movement in the moonlight. When I mentioned it at breakfast, Dominic suggested pack rats or maybe a kangaroo rat. Miko looked less convinced, but said nothing. Our local contact, Raymond Whitefeather, arrived mid-morning to guide us to several interview locations. In his 60s with deep creases around his eyes and a silver braid hanging down his back, Raymond had a dignified presence that commanded respect. As we drove across the rugged terrain in his weathered pickup truck, he pointed out landmarks, each with its own story. "This land remembers everything," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Every footstep, every word spoken, every drop of blood spilled. Nothing is ever truly forgotten here." At our first stop, an elderly woman named Clara shared stories her grandfather had told her about creatures that could wear human skin. She spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing something as mundane as the weather. "They're drawn to negative emotions," she explained while Miko recorded. "Grief, rage, jealousy. They smell it like sharks smell blood and water." Her gaze lingered on me for an uncomfortable moment. "They'll mimic loved ones, call your name in familiar voices. If you answer, you're giving permission for them to come closer." As we headed back to camp that evening, Raymond grew increasingly agitated. He kept checking his rearview mirror, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. When we asked what was wrong, he simply shook his head. "We talked too much about them today," he finally said. "Sometimes speaking of such things is like sending out an invitation." Before dropping us off, he pressed small leather pouches into our hands. "Keep these with you," he instructed. "Don't take them off, not even to sleep." Inside each pouch was a mixture of herbs that filled the air with a sharp, medicinal scent. I slipped mine around my neck without question, but Dominic rolled his eyes when Raymond wasn't looking. That night, as darkness settled over the desert, we heard the first call, my name, carried on the wind, spoken in my mother's voice. My mother who had died when I was 16. The sound sent ice through my veins, and I clutched the leather pouch unconsciously. Beside me, Dominic froze mid-sentence, his skepticism finally shaken. Something was out there in the darkness, watching us from just beyond the firelight, waiting for one of us to answer its call. None of us slept well that night. Every sound from the surrounding desert seemed amplified. The rustle of sagebrush in the wind, the distant howl of coyotes, the strange clicking noises that came from everywhere and nowhere. Dominic kept the fire burning until dawn, feeding it with trembling hands whenever the flames threatened to die down. Miko huddled in her sleeping bag nearby, transcribing the day's interviews with mechanical focus, as if the mundane task could somehow ward off the unnatural dread that had settled over our camp. Morning brought no relief. We found strange tracks circling our tents, not quite human, not quite animal, with elongated toes ending in what looked like claw marks. More disturbing were the symbols drawn in the dirt just beyond our campsite, intricate spirals and jagged lines that hadn't been there the previous evening. When I tried to photograph them, my camera malfunctioned, the screen filling with static before going completely black. "We should leave," Miko said quietly, her academic enthusiasm replaced by genuine fear. "These signs, they match what Clara described yesterday. Markers that..." She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. signs that we were being hunted, that something had selected us. I felt the weight of my research hanging heavy around my neck. Had my questions somehow invited this? Had my curiosity put us all in danger? Dominic, stubborn to the core, insisted we were overreacting. Probably local kids messing with the outsiders, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Nevertheless, we decided to continue with our scheduled interviews. Raymond was supposed to pick us up at noon, but by 1 o'clock he still hadn't arrived. Cell service was non-existent in this remote area, leaving us stranded with Dominic's Bronco as our only transportation. We decided to drive to the nearest town for help. The Bronco, which had performed flawlessly during our journey, now refused to start. Dominic spent hours checking the engine, growing increasingly frustrated. "This makes no sense," he muttered, wiping grease from his hands. "Everything looks fine, but it's like something's drained all the power." As he spoke, a raven landed on the Bronco's hood, regarding us with unervingly intelligent eyes before tapping its beak 3 times against the windshield and flying away. By late afternoon, we faced a difficult decision: stay put and hope Raymond would eventually come looking for us, or hike toward town. The nearest settlement was 15 miles away across rough terrain, a challenging journey even in daylight. As the sun began its descent, we chose to remain at camp for one more night, barricading ourselves inside the largest tent with our remaining food and water. The whispering started at twilight, multiple voices calling our names, sometimes using inflections and nicknames only close friends or family would know. The voices came from different directions, circling the tent, sometimes so close it felt like the speakers were standing right beside us. Miko began praying softly in Japanese, clutching her leather pouch like a lifeline. Dominic had finally abandoned his skepticism, his face pale as he kept watch with my field knife gripped tightly in his hand. Around midnight, something brushed against the outside of our tent. Not the random touch of wind-blown debris, but deliberate strokes, as if fingers were trailing along the fabric. Then came the face, a silhouette pressed against the tent wall, illuminated from behind by the dying embers of our fire. It had a human shape, but wrong proportions, the neck too long, the head slightly misshapen. We held our breath as it lingered there, watching us through the thin barrier. "Don't look directly at it," Miko whispered, her voice barely audible. "Clara said they can capture your soul through eye contact." Whether this was true or not, none of us were willing to test the theory. The silhouette remained for what felt like hours before finally retreating. But our relief was short-lived. Soon after, we heard Raymond's voice outside, calling for help, saying he'd crashed his truck and was badly injured. Dominic moved toward the tent entrance, but I grabbed his arm. "It's not him," I hissed, remembering Clara's warning about mimicked voices. Raymond wouldn't come wandering through the desert at night, not after everything he told us. The pleading continued, growing more desperate, more convincing. The voice, whatever it was, knew exactly how to manipulate human compassion, how to make us question our own instincts. Dawn revealed a new horror. The protective symbols Raymond had drawn around our camp had been systematically destroyed, replaced with different markings, crude, angular shapes that made my eyes hurt to look at them directly. And hanging from a nearby juniper tree was a small animal, a jackrabbit, skinned and displayed like a grotesque warning. But most disturbing of all was what we found half buried in the dirt near our fire pit. Raymond's leather medicine pouch, torn open, its contents scattered and crushed into the earth. Raymond's desecrated medicine pouch changed everything. Either something had happened to him, or the entity hunting us had grown powerful enough to take objects of protection from him. Neither possibility offered any comfort. We packed essentials into our backpacks: water, energy bars, first aid supplies, and matches. With the Bronco still dead and no sign of rescue, we had no choice but to hike towards civilization. The Nevada desert in late summer is merciless, the sun beating down with relentless intensity. We set out early, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before the worst heat of the day. Miko plotted our course using a topographical map, seeking the path of least resistance through the rugged landscape. Dominic took the lead, machete in hand, while I brought up the rear, constantly scanning our surroundings. The feeling of being watched never subsided. About 3 miles from camp, we found Raymond's truck. It had veered off the dirt road, the front end crumpled against a large boulder. The driver's side door hung open, keys still in the ignition. Blood spattered the steering wheel and dashboard. The sight sent a chill through me despite the oppressive heat. When Dominic tried the ignition, the engine turned over immediately. Unlike our Bronco, there was nothing mechanically wrong with Raymond's vehicle. "We should drive back to camp, get our stuff, and get the hell out of here," Dominic said, already sliding into the driver's seat. But Miko and I hesitated, staring at the blood. If Raymond was injured, possibly dying somewhere in this vast desert, the ethical dilemma tore at us. In the end, human decency won out over self-preservation. We decided to search the immediate area for signs of Raymond before making our escape. That decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. We found a trail of blood droplets leading away from the truck, heading deeper into a nearby canyon. Following it, we discovered Raymond's footprints alongside another set of tracks, the same not-quite-human prints we'd seen around our camp. The trail led to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. The blood trail continued inside. "We need to go in," I said, clicking on my flashlight. Dominic grabbed my shoulder, shaking his head vehemently. "Are you insane? That's exactly what it wants." His voice echoed off the canyon walls, unnaturally loud. Miko stood frozen between us, her eyes wide with fear as she stared at something on the ground. Following her gaze, I saw Raymond's silver watch lying in the dust, its face shattered, the hand stopped at 3:33. The decision was taken from us when we heard Raymond's voice emanating from the crevice. Weak, barely audible, begging for help. This time, there was no mistaking the genuine human pain in his words. Whatever doubts we had were overshadowed by the very real possibility that our friend was dying. One by one, we squeezed through the narrow opening. The passage widened into a small cave, dimly lit by sunlight filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Raymond lay crumpled against the far wall, his silver braid matted with blood, his breathing shallow and labored. When he saw us, terror flashed across his face. "No," he gasped, trying to push himself away despite his injuries. "You shouldn't have come. It wanted you to find me, use me as bait." Before we could react, a strange clicking sound filled the cave, echoing from every direction at once. The temperature plummeted, our breath suddenly visible in the frigid air. In the shadows behind Raymond, something moved, something tall and gaunt with limbs that bent at impossible angles. It stayed just beyond the reach of our flashlights, a silhouette that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Raymond's body began to convulse, his back arching unnaturally. When he opened his mouth to scream, the sound that emerged wasn't human, a high-pitched keening that made my ears ring and my vision blur. Dominic lunged forward to help him, but Miko held him back, her face ashen. "That's not Raymond anymore," she whispered. "We need to run. Now." We backed toward the entrance, moving slowly, afraid that any sudden movement would trigger an attack. The thing inhabiting Raymond's body watched us with his eyes that now reflected light like an animal's, glowing yellow in the beam of our flashlights. As we reached the narrow crevice, Raymond's body began to change, flesh rippling and bones cracking as it contorted into something else entirely. We squeezed through the passage one after another, panic giving us speed we didn't know we possessed. Behind us, claws scraped against stone as the creature pursued us, moving faster than anything with two legs should be able to move. We burst into daylight, sprinting toward Raymond's truck without looking back. The inhuman shriek that followed us seemed to split the very air, carrying with it a promise of pain and terror beyond anything we could imagine. We reached Raymond's truck in record time, fueled by sheer terror. Dominic fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before managing to jam them into the ignition. The engine roared to life as Miko and I piled into the passenger seats, slamming and locking the doors. Through the rear window, I caught a glimpse of something emerging from the canyon, a twisted figure running with an unnatural, loping gait, covering ground with impossible speed. Dominic floored the accelerator, sending dust billowing behind us as we fishtailed onto the dirt road. "It's following us," Miko said, her voice tight with panic as she stared into the side mirror. I turned to look and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing wearing Raymond's skin was keeping pace with the truck, running alongside us about 50 yards away, matching our speed of nearly 40 miles per hour. As we watched in horror, its form began to change again. Raymond's features melting away like wax under flame, revealing something ancient and malevolent beneath. Its jaw unhinged, stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. For a brief, terrible moment, it turned its head to look directly at us, and I felt a cold pressure against my mind, like bony fingers probing for weakness. The truck's engine suddenly sputtered, the dashboard lights flickering. No, Dominic shouted, slamming his palm against the steering wheel as the vehicle began to lose power. The speedometer dropped, 35, 30, 25, as the skinwalker drew closer. In desperation, I grabbed Raymond's medicine pouch from around my neck and held it up to the window, remembering his words about protection. The effect was immediate and shocking. The creature recoiled as if struck, its form blurring at the edges. The truck's engine surged back to life, and Dominic seized the opportunity, pushing the accelerator to the floor. We sped away, watching in the mirrors as the skinwalker fell behind, eventually disappearing from view. None of us spoke for several minutes, the only sound our ragged breathing and the rumble of tires on dirt. Our relief was premature. As we approached a bend in the road, a massive raven swooped down, its wingspan impossibly wide, directly into our path. Dominic swerved instinctively, sending the truck into a skid. We careened off the road, bouncing violently across the uneven terrain before coming to rest against a large boulder. The impact deployed the airbags, filling the cabin with acrid smoke and dust. Miraculously, none of us were seriously injured, just bruised and shaken. But the truck wouldn't start again. We were stranded 10 miles from the nearest town, in territory claimed by something that defied rational explanation. The sun was already low on the horizon. Within an hour, darkness would fall. We grabbed our backpacks and Raymond's emergency kit from the truck bed, then set off at a brisk pace toward town. Every shadow, every sound from the surrounding desert set my nerves on edge. As the last light faded from the sky, we spotted a small structure in the distance, an abandoned mining shack, its weathered boards silvery with age. It wasn't ideal, but the walls and roof would provide more protection than being caught in the open. Inside, we found a single room with a rusted iron stove, a broken chair, and an ancient cot with a moth-eaten mattress. Dominic immediately set about barricading the door and single window with whatever he could find. Miko emptied her pack, revealing that she'd kept items from Clara and other elders we'd interviewed, bundles of sage, bottles of blessed water, small bags of salt. They told me these might be needed, she said quietly, arranging them in specific patterns around the shack's perimeter. I didn't question her methods. At this point, I was willing to try anything that might keep us alive until morning. Night fell like a smothering blanket, bringing with it an unnatural silence. No wind, no insects, no distant calls of nocturnal animals, just a heavy stillness that pressed against our ears. We took turns keeping watch, though none of us could have slept even if we'd tried. Around midnight, the first signs of the skinwalker's presence appeared, soft scratching at the walls, circling the shack, testing our defenses. Then came the voices, my father calling my name, Dominic's ex-girlfriend begging him for help, Miko's grandmother speaking rapidly in Japanese. The voices grew more desperate, more convincing. I pressed my hands over my ears, reciting data points from my research in a desperate attempt to stay anchored in reality. Beside me, Miko chanted prayers while clutching a small jade Buddha her mother had given her. The attack began around 3 a.m., that same haunting hour marked on Raymond's broken watch. It started with a violent pounding on the roof, so powerful that dust and splinters rained down on us. The entire shack shook with each impact. Then came the walls, wood creaking and bending inward, as if enormous pressure was being applied from all sides simultaneously. The single window, despite being barricaded, shattered inward, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Through the broken window, long, spindly fingers began to reach inside, grayish-black digits ending in claws that looked sharp enough to shred metal. Dominic swung at them with Raymond's hunting knife, drawing back a dark, viscous fluid that might have been blood. The creature shrieked in pain or rage, a sound so alien it seemed to vibrate the very air molecules around us. In that moment of distraction, something crashed through the shack's thin roof, a massive form that landed in the center of the room. Crouching low, its limbs folded at impossible angles. In the dim light of our flashlights, I could make out a vaguely humanoid shape with elongated limbs and a skull-like face that was both animal and human, ancient and ageless. The stench of decay and something musky, primal, filled the confined space. Dominic pushed Miko and me behind him, knife raised in trembling hands. The skinwalker rose to its full height, towering nearly 8 feet tall, its head brushing against what remained of the ceiling. It made that terrible clicking sound again. Communication or warning, I couldn't tell. Then, with movements too fast to follow, it lunged. What happened next saved our lives, but has haunted my nightmares ever since. Dominic met the creature's charge, slashing wildly with the knife. In the chaos, Miko grabbed a bottle of blessed water and flung its contents directly into the skinwalker's face. The effect was like throwing acid. The creature's skin bubbled and smoked, its scream so piercing that blood began to trickle from my ears. Taking advantage of its momentary agony, we bolted for the door, ripping away the barricade and bursting into the night. Behind us, the shack erupted in flames. Whether from the overturned stove or something more supernatural, I'll never know. We ran blindly into the darkness, guided only by the stars and our desperate need to put distance between ourselves and the horror we'd unleashed. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when we heard the sound of engines, multiple vehicles approaching along the dirt road ahead. We collapsed to our knees, exhausted beyond measure, as headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom. 3 tribal police vehicles and a pickup truck came into view, slowing to a stop as the officers spotted us. Among them was Clara, the elder who had warned us about skinwalkers on that first day, a lifetime ago. Raymond didn't come home last night, she explained as EMTs checked our injuries. When we couldn't reach any of you, we organized a search party. Her eyes held questions she didn't voice as she took in our battered appearances, the wild terror still evident in our expressions. Instead, she simply said, "You encountered it, didn't you? The one that walks between forms." I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened to Raymond. The words stuck in my throat, trapped behind a wall of horror and guilt. It was Miko who finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper as she described finding him in the cave, his possession, the pursuit, the attack at the shack. With each detail, Clara's expression grew more grave, the lines around her eyes deepening. "Raymond knew the risks," she said finally, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. "He chose to guide you because he believed your work was important, preserving the old knowledge, even the dangerous parts. Especially the dangerous parts." She pressed something into my palm, a small stone carving of a bear, worn smooth by years of handling. "This was his. He would want you to have it." The sun crested the horizon as we were loaded into the police vehicles. In the growing light, I could see smoke rising from the direction of the abandoned shack, a dark column twisting against the pale sky. One of the officers mentioned that they'd spotted the burning structure from miles away and had already dispatched firefighters to the scene. I said nothing, knowing no conventional explanation could account for what had really happened there. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of something watching us from a distant ridge, a tall, dark silhouette standing motionless against the morning sky. No one else seemed to notice it, and I didn't point it out. Some sights are better left unacknowledged, some experiences too terrible to share. The figure remained visible for several seconds before seeming to dissolve into the landscape, leaving no trace of its presence. The official investigation labeled Raymond's disappearance as missing, presumed deceased, likely due to exposure or animal attack. The burnt shack was attributed to vagrants or careless campers. Our statements were taken, then quietly filed away. Too bizarre to be believed, too disturbing to be pursued. Within weeks, the case was effectively closed, becoming just another unsolved mystery in the vast Nevada desert. We left as soon as we were physically able, abandoning our research, our equipment, everything that might connect us to that place. Dominic drove us straight back to Seattle without stopping except for fuel, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. None of us spoke much during that journey. There seemed nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like madness. Back in civilization, we tried to resume our normal lives, but the experience had marked us in ways that couldn't be erased. Miko dropped out of graduate school, eventually taking vows at a Buddhist monastery in Northern California. Dominic threw himself into his work, taking increasingly dangerous construction jobs as if testing the limits of his borrowed time. And I abandoned my ethnographic research entirely, taking a teaching position that kept me firmly within city limits, surrounded by concrete and steel and artificial light. But the Skinwalker wasn't finished with us. It started with dreams, vivid nightmares in which I ran on all fours across the desert, hunting human prey within human senses. I would wake tasting blood, my sheets torn by fingers that had curled into claws during the night. Then came the incidents, blackouts where I would find myself miles from home with no memory of how I'd gotten there, dirt under my fingernails, scratches on my arms and legs. 3 months after our return, Dominic committed suicide. The note he left mentioned changes he couldn't control, a darkness growing inside him that frightened him more than death. When I identified his body, I noticed strange markings carved into his chest, symbols matching those we'd seen in the Nevada desert. The medical examiner attributed them to self-harm in the throes of mental illness. I knew better, but kept silent. Who would believe the truth? Last week, I found a raven feather on my pillow, black as midnight, larger than any natural bird could produce. Beside it lay a small pouch of dried herbs that smelled of sage and cedar, wrapped in a scrap of paper bearing Clara's handwriting. It follows. Protection waning. Return to the land of its power to end this. I understood the message immediately. The Skinwalker had followed us home, growing stronger as the distance from its territory increased our vulnerability. Tomorrow I leave for Nevada, alone this time. I carry Raymond's bear carving, Dominic's hunting knife, and the knowledge that I may never return. But I go willingly, understanding now what Raymond meant when he said the land remembers everything. Some debts can only be paid in person, some battles can only be fought on ground chosen by the enemy. If you're reading this, it means I failed. The journal you hold contains everything I've learned about Skinwalkers, their strengths, their weaknesses, the rules that bind them. Use this knowledge wisely, but know that even understanding these creatures attracts their attention. They are drawn to awareness like moths to flame. And if you ever find yourself in Nevada's Great Basin, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of blood and gold, listen carefully to the voices carried on the wind. If one calls your name in a voice you recognize, a loved one, a friend, someone who couldn't possibly be there, do not answer. Do not look back. Run, and pray that your fear gives you the speed to escape what follows. My name is Garrett Fleming, 36 years old, and I've called Chicago home for my entire adult life. I work as a documentary filmmaker, specializing in unexplained phenomena and fringe beliefs. My skepticism has always been my greatest asset in this field. The ability to maintain objectivity while interviewing people who claim to have encountered everything from UFOs to ghosts. That skepticism died in the mountains of Nevada, replaced by a bone-deep terror that no amount of rational thinking can dispel. It began with a seemingly routine assignment, documenting indigenous legends about the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit from Algonquian folklore that possesses humans, driving them to cannibalism and madness. Although Wendigo stories originated in the northeastern woodlands, similar entities appear in legends across North America. My research led me to accounts of a Nevada variant, described by certain northern Paiute elders as the hunger that never sleeps, a spirit that could transfer from person to person, turning ordinary people into insatiable predators. I assembled a small team, my longtime cameraman Lucas, sound engineer Petra, and Dr. Eleanor Walsh, an anthropologist specializing in comparative mythology. We also invited James Redfeather, a northern Paiute cultural consultant who had initially contacted me about these lesser-known Wendigo stories. His grandfather had encountered something in the Nevada high country in the 1950s that matched Wendigo descriptions, though the Paiute had their own name for it, a word that roughly translates to the Hollow One. We set out in early November, driving from Reno into the remote reaches of the Toiyabe Range in central Nevada. James directed us to a narrow access road that wound its way up into mountains that looked barren and forbidding under steel-gray skies. "This is sacred land," he explained as our two SUVs climbed the switchbacks. My people believe the spirit world is closer to ours in places like this, where few humans venture. The campsite James selected was near an ancient bristlecone pine forest, the gnarled trees some of the oldest living things on Earth. Their twisted forms, sculpted by millennia of harsh conditions, created an otherworldly atmosphere that felt perfect for our documentary's aesthetic. We set up our tents in a small clearing, surrounding ourselves with cameras, sound equipment, and the comforts of modern technology, as if these things could somehow protect us from what lurked in these mountains. That first evening, we gathered around the campfire while James shared his grandfather's account. The old man had been part of a hunting party that ventured into these same mountains during an unusually harsh winter. Cut off by a sudden blizzard, they took shelter in a cave for 3 days. When supplies ran low, one member of the party, a man named Carter who wasn't Paiute but had married into the tribe, began acting strangely, complaining of an insatiable hunger despite having the same rations as everyone else. On the third night, James said, his voice dropping to just above a whisper, my grandfather woke to find Carter standing over another hunter with a knife. His eyes were different, empty. When they confronted him, he fled into the blizzard. They thought surely he had died in the storm. James paused, staring into the flames. 3 weeks later, Carter walked into his own funeral service. He had no memory of how he had survived or what he had done during those missing weeks. But livestock began disappearing from nearby ranches, and later, hikers went missing too. Eleanor leaned forward, her academic interest clearly piqued. The Wendigo is traditionally associated with winter, famine, and isolation, she noted. It's fascinating to find variants of the legend in desert regions, though these mountains do experience harsh winters. What none of us realized then was that Eleanor's academic interest would soon become dangerously personal. As we finished dinner, the temperature dropped dramatically. The forecast hadn't mentioned snow, but dark clouds rolled in with alarming speed, obscuring the stars and moon. By midnight, fat snowflakes were falling, accumulating quickly on the frozen ground. I checked the weather radar on my satellite phone before the signal failed. A freak early storm had developed directly over our location. We were effectively cut off, just as James's grandfather had been decades earlier. That night, I dreamt of running through the bristlecone forest, pursuing something that smelled of fear and warm blood. In the dream, my stomach was a hollow pit of endless craving that no amount of food could satisfy. I woke gasping, my breath fogging in the freezing air of my tent. Outside, the storm howled, driving snow through the smallest gaps in the fabric. But louder than the wind was another sound, a rhythmic tapping on the exterior of my tent, like long fingers drumming a patient, hungry pattern. When I called out, the tapping stopped immediately. I fumbled for my flashlight, heart pounding against my ribs. The beam revealed only the rippling wall of my tent, now coated with several inches of snow. Beyond it, through the nylon, I could make out a tall, thin shadow that might have been one of the bristlecones. Except I was certain no trees had been that close when I'd pitched my tent. I watched, hardly daring to breathe, as the shadow slowly retreated into the darkness between heartbeats. Morning revealed a transformed landscape. Nearly a foot of snow covered everything, bending the smaller trees under its weight. Eleanor emerged from her tent looking pale and drawn. When Lucas asked if she was feeling okay, she mumbled something about bad dreams and declined breakfast, saying she wasn't hungry. I thought nothing of it at the time, focused instead on salvaging what we could of our shooting schedule despite the unexpected weather. James appeared concerned as he surveyed the snow-covered terrain. "This isn't natural," he said quietly, crouching to examine tracks that circled our camp. Tracks that resembled barefoot human prints, but were too large, the toes elongated almost like claws. Something walked among us last night, something that heard us speaking its name. When he stood, his expression was grave. We should leave this place now, but the storm had other ideas. As we hurriedly packed our gear, the wind intensified, bringing another heavy wave of snowfall. By the time we reached the vehicles, visibility had dropped to mere feet, and the narrow access road had disappeared beneath pristine white drifts. We were trapped, just as James's grandfather had been. And as Eleanor stared hungrily at the back of Lucas's neck while he struggled to clear snow from the windshield, I couldn't shake the feeling that history was about to repeat itself in the worst possible way. The first real indication that something was terribly wrong came that afternoon. With our departure blocked by the storm, we'd retreated to our tents, using portable heaters to stave off the biting cold. I was reviewing footage on my laptop when Petra burst in, her face pale with worry. "It's Eleanor," she said, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "She's been outside for hours. In just her sweater. Lucas went to check on her. And she wasn't herself." I followed Petra back to where Eleanor stood motionless amid the bristle cones, snow piling on her shoulders, her academic demeanor replaced by something feral and watchful. Lucas was trying to reason with her, to convince her to come back to camp. As we approached, I noticed her posture. Unnaturally still, head cocked at an odd angle like a predator assessing prey. When she turned to look at us, her eyes seemed different. The pupils expanded to consume almost all of the iris, giving her a hollow, hungry look. "She needs a doctor," Lucas said, keeping his distance. "She's not responding to her name, and she feels burning hot despite standing out here for God knows how long." He reached for her arm, and Eleanor's reaction was immediate and disturbing. She hissed like a cornered animal, lips pulling back to reveal teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. Lucas recoiled, stumbling backward into the snow. It took all four of us to bring Eleanor back to camp, her body alternating between rigid resistance and unnerving limpness. We settled her in her tent, wrapped in thermal blankets despite her skin radiating heat that seemed impossible in the freezing conditions. James refused to enter the tent, standing outside with an expression of grim recognition. "This is how it begins," he said quietly. "First comes the fever, then the hunger. It's using her." While Lucas and Petra monitored Eleanor, I pulled James aside, demanding a more thorough explanation. He hesitated, clearly conflicted about sharing certain aspects of his cultural knowledge. "The Wendigo spirit doesn't just possess a person," he finally explained. "It transforms them physically. The more they consume, the more they change. But it's patient. It can wait until we're vulnerable, until isolation and fear have weakened our resolve." The storm showed no signs of abating as evening approached. Our satellite phone remained without signal, cutting us off from any possibility of external help. We established a rotation to watch Eleanor, whose condition continued to deteriorate in unsettling ways. Her fever burned so hot that snow melted instantly when it touched her skin. More alarming were the physical changes. Her fingers seemed longer, joints more pronounced, her once round face becoming gaunt despite having eaten a substantial breakfast before her transformation began. My shift came at midnight. I entered Eleanor's tent with a mixture of concern and dread, fighting the irrational thought that something other than my colleague now occupied her body. She lay motionless under the thermal blankets, her breathing shallow and ragged. For nearly an hour, I sat in silence, occasionally checking her pulse, which raced under my fingertips like a trapped bird. Then, without warning, her eyes snapped open, pupils so dilated that her eyes appeared entirely black in the dim light of the lantern. "So hungry," she whispered, her voice layered with a guttural undertone that raised the hair on my neck. "You don't know what it's like, Garrett. This emptiness, it never ends." Her hand shot out from beneath the blankets with impossible speed, fingers wrapping around my wrist with crushing strength. "I can smell your fear. It makes the hunger worse." I jerked away, knocking over the lantern as I scrambled toward the tent entrance. In the sudden darkness, I heard Eleanor moving. Not the sounds of a sick woman struggling to rise, but fluid, predatory movements. By the time I fumbled the tent flap open, she was standing, silhouetted against the tent wall by the external camp lights. Her proportions were wrong, limbs too long, back hunched as if her spine was realigning itself. "Something's wrong with Eleanor," I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Lucas emerged from his tent immediately, followed by Petra. Only James hesitated, emerging with evident reluctance, a hunting knife gripped in his hand. Before any of us could react, Eleanor burst through the tent entrance, moving with a speed that defied human capability. She didn't run like a person. She loped, her gait uneven and animalistic, disappearing into the bristlecone forest before we could stop her. "We have to find her," Petra insisted, already reaching for her heavy coat. "She'll freeze to death out there." But James blocked her path, his expression haunted. "That's not Eleanor anymore," he said firmly. "And cold won't kill it. Only fire can destroy a Wendigo." He turned to me, his grip tightening on the knife. "Your friend is already gone. What's wearing her skin now will come back, not because it needs shelter, but because it needs to feed. And we're the only food source for miles." The realization sent ice through my veins. We were trapped by the storm, miles from help, with a creature from nightmare hunting us through an ancient forest. Worse, that creature wore the face of someone we knew and trusted, someone we might hesitate to defend ourselves against until it was too late. As James instructed us to gather anything that could serve as a weapon, I caught sight of fresh tracks leading away from Eleanor's tent, human footprints gradually elongating, the spacing increasing, until they barely resembled anything a person could make. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the snowfall, revealing a landscape transformed into something alien and hostile. The pristine white surface was marred by a disturbing trail, Eleanor's footprints leading into the forest, interspersed with patches of scarlet where her bare feet had bled, and darker, more disturbing stains that suggested she had found something to satisfy her hunger. A hill overlooking our camp offered the best vantage point to search for her, and as Lucas trained his camera's telephoto lens on the surrounding terrain, we all saw it. A figure standing at the forest's edge, too tall and thin to be human despite wearing Eleanor's tattered clothing. As we watched in horror, the figure tilted back its head and released a cry that started as Eleanor's voice calling my name, but twisted halfway through into something ancient and inhuman, a sound of starvation and rage that echoed across the snow-covered landscape. The Wendigo had announced its presence. The hunt had begun. The creature that had once been Eleanor kept its distance throughout the morning, circling our camp just beyond the tree line, visible in glimpses between the gnarled bristlecones. Sometimes it moved on all fours with an unsettling fluidity. Other times it stood upright, its proportions becoming increasingly inhuman with each sighting. What disturbed me most was the intelligence in its movements. This wasn't mindless predation, but calculated stalking, testing our defenses, learning our patterns. James worked methodically to secure our perimeter, creating protective measures that seemed more ritual than practical. Circles of ash from our campfire, bristlecone branches arranged in specific patterns, strange symbols carved into the snow. "These won't stop it completely," he explained, "but they'll slow it down, make it hesitate." The Wendigo respects certain boundaries, ancient rules, but only when it's not desperate with hunger. Lucas had fallen into a numb silence, periodically reviewing the footage from yesterday, the last images of Eleanor as herself. Petra maintained a brave face, but I caught her crying quietly while inventorying our dwindling supplies. The storm had trapped us with minimal provisions, forcing us to ration carefully. The irony wasn't lost on me, our growing hunger mirroring the insatiable craving that drove the creature hunting us. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," I said finally, gathering everyone around the map spread across the hood of one of our snow-covered SUVs. "James, tell us everything. How to fight it, how to survive it." My documentary filmmaker instincts had shifted entirely to survival. This was no longer about capturing folklore, but escaping it. James hesitated, then nodded grimly. "The Wendigo isn't just a monster. It's a spirit of insatiable greed. It possesses those who resort to consuming human flesh, but also those consumed by metaphorical hungers for power, wealth, or dominance over others." He traced the area around our location on the map. "This particular spirit has been here for generations. My grandfather's encounter wasn't the first, just the most recent until now." According to James, local ranchers and miners had periodically disappeared since the 1800s. Their remains sometimes found stripped of flesh, bones cracked open for marrow. More disturbing were the cases where the missing returned, changed, setting off chains of disappearances before eventually vanishing themselves. "The spirit jumps from host to host," James explained. "When one body wears out or is destroyed, it seeks another. Someone weakened by hunger, fear, or isolation becomes the perfect vessel." Lucas finally broke his silence. "Can we save her? Is there any way to exorcise this thing?" The desperation in his voice revealed feelings for Eleanor that went beyond professional collegiality. James's expression softened with compassion. "The longer it possesses her, the less of Eleanor remains. After a certain point, there's nothing left to save. As darkness approached, we implemented James's recommendations, building our fire larger than safety would normally dictate, positioning our tents in a tight cluster, establishing a rotating watch schedule. I took first watch, scanning the perimeter with a powerful flashlight, the hunting rifle James had brought feeling inadequate in my hands. The attack came 3 hours into my shift, not from the forest as expected, but from beneath one of our vehicles where the creature had somehow slithered its elongated form without detection. I caught only a flash of movement before it was upon me, a blur of twisted limbs and Eleanor's face stretched into something barely recognizable, her jaw unhinged to reveal rows of sharpened teeth. I fired the rifle instinctively, the shot going wide as the creature knocked me backward into the snow. Its strength was unnatural, fingers like iron bands around my throat. Up close, I could see how drastically Eleanor had transformed. Her skin stretched tight over an altered bone structure, eyes sunken into dark pits, nostrils flared like an animal's. Only her voice retained something human as she leaned close, whispering, "I'm so hungry, Garrett. Let me feed." The attack ended as abruptly as it began. James appeared with a burning branch from the fire, swinging it in a wide arc that caught the creature across its face. It released me with a shriek of pain, scrambling backward with inhuman agility. For a moment, something flickered in its eyes, recognition, perhaps even a glimmer of Eleanor fighting for control, before it loped away into the darkness, movements jerky and disjointed, as if its body couldn't quite coordinate its new form. "It's changing faster than I expected," James said as he helped me to my feet. "The cold must be accelerating the transformation." He examined the shallow cuts on my neck where the creature's claws had broken skin. "These need to be cleaned immediately. Wendigo contamination can spread through blood contact." The rest of the night passed in tense alertness. By morning, my encounter had shattered any remaining skepticism among our group. We were being hunted by something supernatural, something that defied rational explanation. Lucas reviewed the footage from his camera, which he'd left running on a tripod during the attack. The images were disturbing confirmation. Eleanor's body twisting in ways human anatomy shouldn't allow, her face flickering between recognizable humanity and something ancient and malevolent. We spent the day fortifying our position and planning our escape. The storm had finally begun to subside, though the accumulated snow made travel difficult. James believed we could reach the access road by nightfall if we left immediately, but moving in daylight would expose us to the Wendigo. "It prefers to hunt at night," he explained, "but hunger might drive it to attack regardless. Still, darkness gives it too much advantage." Our decision was made for us when Petra spotted fresh tracks circling our camp. Not just the Wendigos, but also wolf prints following the same path. "It's controlling them," James said softly, his face ashen. "The more powerful it becomes, the more influence it has over predator animals." In the distance, we heard howls, not the natural calls of a wolf pack, but something discordant and wrong, as if the animals were being forced to make sounds their bodies weren't designed for. We packed only essentials: water, remaining food, weapons, and first aid supplies. Everything else we abandoned to save weight and increase speed. As we prepared to leave, I found myself staring at Eleanor's tent, still containing her personal belongings, her journal filled with academic notes, a dog-eared paperback, a small photo of her parents tucked into her wallet. The contrast between these intimate human details and the monster she had become was almost unbearable. The sun was already low on the horizon when we set out, for instead of 5, moving as quickly as the deep snow would allow. James led the way, followed by Petra, with Lucas and me bringing up the rear. We had covered perhaps a mile when the howling began again, closer this time, coming from multiple directions. Through the trees ahead, I caught glimpses of gray shapes moving parallel to our path. The Wendigo had found its hunting companions, and as the last light faded from the sky, leaving us in the ghostly illumination of a snow-reflected moon, I knew with certainty that we wouldn't all survive the night. The wolves came at us from both sides, their movements unnatural and jerky, as if they were puppets controlled by invisible strings. Their eyes reflected the beam of our flashlights with an eerie red glow, foam dripping from jaws that snapped rhythmically even when not attacking. These weren't normal predators hunting for food. They were extensions of the Wendigo's will, driven to wound and separate us. James reacted instantly, firing the hunting rifle into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, temporarily scattering the pack. "They're still partly wolves," he shouted as we broke into a stumbling run through the deep snow. "Loud noises might confuse them, but it won't work for long. The spirit's control will override their natural caution." We formed a tight group, moving as fast as conditions allowed, using the flashlights to sweep the darkness around us. The terrain sloped downward, taking us out of the bristlecone forest into an area of younger pines. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles ahead, I could make out the gap in the trees that marked the access road, our path to potential safety. The attack resumed with frightening coordination. 3 wolves charged from behind, while 2 more cut off our forward progress. Petra screamed as one lunged at her leg, teeth tearing through her heavy snow pants. Lucas swung the metal tripod he'd converted into a makeshift weapon, catching the animal across the muzzle with enough force to crack bone. Instead of retreating, the injured wolf simply realigned its broken jaw with a sickening sound and prepared to attack again. "Fire!" James yelled, fumbling in his pocket for the emergency flares we distributed earlier. We each ignited one, the sudden brightness and chemical smell creating a temporary barrier between us and the unnatural pack. The wolves prowled just beyond the red light, their movements becoming increasingly synchronized, less animal and more like extensions of a single consciousness. Using the flares as cover, we changed direction, veering east toward a rocky outcropping that might provide some defensible position. The going was brutally difficult. The snow reached mid-thigh in places, each step requiring enormous effort. Behind us, the wolves followed at a measured pace, no longer rushing, but simply waiting for our strength to fail. We had almost reached the rocks when I noticed something disturbing. The wolves were herding us, deliberately steering our group by blocking certain paths while leaving others open. With horrifying clarity, I realized we were being driven into a trap. "Stop!" I shouted, grabbing Lucas's arm. "This is what it wants. We're heading straight to it." Too late. From atop the very outcropping we'd been moving toward, a figure rose against the night sky. Eleanor's body now transformed almost beyond recognition, limbs elongated to grotesque proportions, her head cocked at an impossible angle. What remained of her clothing hung in tatters from a frame that had grown to nearly 8 feet tall. When she opened her mouth, the sound that emerged was a terrible blend of Eleanor's voice and something ancient and inhuman. A beckoning call that made the wolves freeze in perfect stillness. "Scatter!" James commanded, but the pack had already closed in, forming a loose circle around us. The Wendigo descended from the rocks with unnatural grace, moving too quickly for something its size. It stopped just outside the fading light of our flares, head tilting from side to side as it studied us with predatory calculation. What disturbed me most was the intelligence still evident in those sunken eyes. Not the feral mindlessness of a monster, but something cunning and patient that had been hunting humans for centuries. Petra's flare died first, plunging her side of our defensive circle into darkness. The Wendigo moved with explosive speed, covering the distance in a heartbeat. Its elongated fingers wrapped around her arm, yanking her away from our group before any of us could react. Lucas lunged after her, swinging the tripod in desperate fury. The metal connected with the Wendigo's skull, producing a wet cracking sound that would have incapacitated any normal creature. The Wendigo merely flinched, then backhanded Lucas with such force that he flew several feet through the air, landing motionless in the snow. James raised the rifle, aiming for what had once been Eleanor's head. "I'm sorry," he whispered, squeezing the trigger. The bullet struck true, but the Wendigo barely staggered, black fluid oozing from the wound rather than blood. It released a sound like laughter, twisted and wrong coming from Eleanor's distorted vocal cords. In that moment of distraction, Petra broke free, scrambling toward me as the Wendigo recovered. There was no time for planning or coordination, only reaction. I grabbed her hand and ran, not toward the access road, but perpendicular to it, charging into the densest part of the forest. James followed, firing the remaining rounds to cover our retreat. Behind us, the Wendigo's frustrated howl vibrated through the night air, followed by the sound of the wolf pack in pursuit. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to collapse, the trees around us becoming a blur of shadow and snow. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath in a small clearing, the horrible truth became apparent. Lucas wasn't with us. In the chaos of the attack and our desperate flight, we had left him behind, unconscious and defenseless against the Wendigo and its wolves. "We have to go back," Petra sobbed, her face streaked with tears and blood from a cut above her eye. "We can't just leave him." But James shook his head grimly, his expression haunted. "He's already gone. Going back means joining him." The harshness of his words reflected an understanding of our situation that Petra and I were still struggling to accept. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore, but a desperate bid for survival. The reality of Lucas's probable fate hit me like a physical blow. I'd brought this team here based on folklore and legends I'd never truly believed in. Now one of my oldest friends was likely dead or worse, transformed into something beyond salvation. The guilt was overwhelming, threatening to paralyze me when action was desperately needed. James pulled us into motion again, orienting himself using the stars visible through breaks in the cloud cover. "The road should be northwest of our position," he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "If we can reach it by dawn, we might find help." What went unspoken was the question of what might find us first. The night grew colder as we pushed forward, our pace slowing as fatigue and exposure took their toll. Petra developed a worrying limp from her encounter with the wolf, while my own extremities had gone from painful to worryingly numb. Only James seemed able to maintain focus, his determination fueled by generations of cultural memory about the creature pursuing us. We were perhaps a mile from the access road when we heard it, a human voice calling through the darkness. Not the Wendigo's eerie mimicry, but Lucas's actual voice, weak and pain-filled. "Help, please. I'm hurt." The sound came from a small ravine to our left, barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the trees. Petra immediately changed direction, moving toward the voice, but James grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "It's not him," he hissed. "Remember what I told you, it can mimic voices." But Petra jerked away, her exhaustion and emotional state overriding caution. "What if you're wrong? What if he's alive and needs us?" I found myself torn between them, the rational part of my mind agreeing with James, while my heart desperately wanted to believe Lucas had somehow survived. The voice called again, this time with a note of confused desperation that sounded painfully authentic. "Garrett? Petra? Where are you guys? I can't feel my legs." The deciding factor was the wolves. They had fallen silent, no longer tracking us through the forest. If this was a trap, wouldn't they be positioned to drive us toward it? I made a choice I would regret for the rest of my life. 5 minutes, I said to James. We check quickly and then continue, regardless of what we find. The ravine was shallow but steep-sided, requiring careful navigation in the snow and darkness. At the bottom, a still form lay crumpled against a fallen log. Lucas, his dark clothing barely visible against the white ground. Petra reached him first, calling his name softly as she knelt beside him. From my position a few feet away, something seemed wrong about his posture, the way his limbs were arranged too carefully, almost artfully. "Lucas!" Petra touched his shoulder gently. The figure rolled over with unnatural speed, revealing a face that was no longer entirely Lucas's. The features stretched and rearranged, teeth extending into needle-like points. Before I could shout a warning, it had Petra by the throat, rising to a height impossible for Lucas's actual body. James fired his reloaded rifle, the shot catching the creature in the shoulder. It released Petra, who fell gasping to the snow, and whirled to face us with awful fluidity. In the moonlight, I could see the transformation wasn't complete. Patches of Lucas's humanity still showed through the Wendigo's corruption, creating a horrifying patchwork effect. Most disturbing was the expression in his eyes, recognition and despair trapped behind the hunger that now controlled him. "Run!" James shouted, positioning himself between us and the creature that had been our friend. "Get to the road. I'll hold it here." He had produced a flare from his pocket, igniting it as the Wendigo, Lucas, advanced with predatory grace. The last I saw as Petra and I scrambled up the ravine was James backing away, the red light of the flare reflecting off snow and transformed flesh alike. We emerged onto level ground to find ourselves surrounded by wolves, at least 8 of them, arrayed in a semicircle that cut off escape in every direction except back down into the ravine. Behind us, a scream echoed up from below, James's voice, cut off with terrible abruptness. The pack leader took a step forward, its movements stilted and uncoordinated, as if it were a marionette controlled by inexperienced hands. Petra and I stood back to back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, blood from her neck wound freezing in the frigid air. I held my own flare ready, knowing it would provide only moments of protection at best. As the wolf pack began to close in, a new sound cut through the night, the distant mechanical rumble of an engine on the access road, followed by the sweep of headlights through the trees perhaps half a mile away. "Help!" I screamed with every ounce of remaining strength. "We're here." Beside me, Petra joined in, our voices carrying through the clear night air. The engine sound paused, then grew louder as the vehicle changed direction, moving toward our position. The wolves hesitated, their unnatural synchronization briefly disrupted by this unexpected development. In that moment of confusion, Petra and I made our break, sprinting toward the approaching lights with desperate speed. Behind us, the Wendigo emerged from the ravine, not Lucas's partially transformed body, but the original creature that had been Eleanor, now joined by its newer creation. Their howls rose in terrible harmony, commanding the wolf pack to pursue us. The headlights grew closer, illuminating the forest ahead. Through gaps in the trees, I could make out a snow plow clearing the access road, part of the efforts to reopen the route after the unexpected storm. Petra stumbled, her injured leg finally giving out. I caught her before she fell, pulling her arm across my shoulders as we pushed forward through snow that seemed to fight against every step. We were perhaps 50 yards from the road when the wolves overtook us. The lead animal launched itself at my back, sending us both crashing to the ground. I felt teeth pierce my jacket, seeking flesh beneath layers of fabric. Petra screamed, using her last strength to swing a broken tree branch at the creature attacking me. The wolf yelped, momentarily releasing its grip. In that instant of reprieve, the forest was suddenly flooded with light. The snow plow had reached a position where its headlamps cut through the trees directly to our location. The unnatural wolves recoiled from the artificial daylight, their connection to the Wendigo weakening in the face of human technology and approaching help. Petra and I staggered the last distance to the road, breaking through the tree line as the plow driver spotted us and brought his vehicle to a skidding halt. The door flew open, and a startled man in a Nevada Department of Transportation uniform gaped at our blood-streaked, half-frozen appearance. "What the hell happened to you people?" he demanded, already reaching for his radio to call for assistance. Behind us, at the forest's edge, I caught one final glimpse of our pursuers, 2 elongated figures standing unnaturally still among the trees, their eyes reflecting the headlights with an inhuman glow. As the plow driver helped us into the cab of his vehicle, I realized with sickening certainty that while we might escape, the Wendigo now had 2 hosts instead of 1. And worse, it knew our names, our faces, our voices, everything it needed to hunt us beyond the confines of these mountains. The investigation that followed our rescue produced more questions than answers. Search parties found no trace of James, Lucas, or Eleanor, only our abandoned camp, equipment scattered as if in hasty departure. The official report listed them as missing, presumed deceased due to exposure and animal attack. The wolf tracks surrounding our campsite were attributed to an unusually aggressive pack, driven to predatory behavior by the harsh early winter conditions. Our accounts of what happened were met with skepticism bordering on pity. Rangers and sheriff's deputies exchanged knowing looks as we described Eleanor's transformation and the Wendigo's unnatural abilities. A helpful paramedic suggested we might be suffering from hypothermia-induced hallucinations, while a sympathetic detective recommended trauma counseling. After the 3rd day of questioning, Petra and I stopped trying to convince them, instead providing the sanitized version of events they clearly expected. We got separated in the storm, wolves attacked, and our friends never made it out. The physical evidence was easy to dismiss or explain away. My neck wounds, animal attack, Petra's injuries, consistent with wolf bites and environmental exposure. The strange black fluid on our clothing that didn't match any known animal, contamination from damaged camera equipment. Within a week, the case was effectively closed, filed away as another tragic accident in wilderness that remains fundamentally hostile to human presence. Petra returned to her home in Portland, permanently scarred both physically and psychologically by our ordeal. We spoke weekly at first, sharing nightmares and jumping at shadows together. But gradually our conversations became less frequent, as if talking to each other kept the horror too fresh in our minds. 6 months after Nevada, she accepted an academic position in New Zealand, literally the opposite side of the world from the Toyabe Range. I understood her decision completely. I returned to Chicago, but the city I'd called home for years no longer felt safe. The concrete and steel that had once represented civilization's triumph over wilderness now seemed like flimsy barricades against something ancient and patient. I found myself obsessively checking local news for reports of missing persons or unusual animal behavior, expecting to find evidence that the Wendigo had followed us east, using Lucas and Eleanor as vessels to spread its influence. The dreams were the worst part. Vivid nightmares in which I ran through snow-covered forests on all fours, consumed by hunger that no amount of feeding could satisfy. I would wake tasting blood, my sheets soaked with sweat despite keeping my apartment at near-freezing temperatures. Sleep deprivation followed me like a shadow, distorting my perception until I couldn't distinguish between paranoia and genuine threat. 3 months after our escape, I received a package with no return address. Inside was James's journal, its pages stained with melted snow and darker substances I refused to analyze. A note scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting read simply, "Found at abandoned campsite. Thought family should have this." But James had no family, at least none he'd ever mentioned to us. The journal's final entries revealed what James had kept from us during the expedition. His grandfather hadn't merely encountered the Wendigo in the 1950s. He had been its host for nearly a week before an elder performed a ritual that drove the spirit back into the mountains. The Paiute had been watching over that region for generations, ensuring no one disturbed the ancient bristlecones where the spirit was believed to dwell. Our documentary project had broken that vigil, giving the Wendigo its first opportunity to feed in decades. Most disturbing was James's description of the Wendigo's true nature, not simply a spirit of hunger, but an entity that collected its victims' consciousness even after their bodies were transformed or destroyed. Eleanor and Lucas weren't just gone. They were trapped within the Wendigo's composite mind, experiencing its predation for eternity. 1 year to the day after Nevada, I spotted Lucas on a Chicago street corner. He looked normal at first glance, same build, same shaggy hair, but when he turned toward me, I glimpsed something hollow behind his eyes, something ancient and hungry that recognized me instantly. He smiled with too many teeth, and when he raised his hand in greeting, his fingers seemed just slightly too long, the joints too flexible. I ran, abandoning my car, my apartment, my identity. 3 days later, I watched from a bus station as police discovered an eviscerated body in my building's basement. The maintenance worker who had complained about strange scratching noises in the walls. The news report mentioned unusual teeth marks and evidence that some organs had been consumed. For 2 years, I've lived off the grid, moving constantly between remote communities where strangers aren't questioned too deeply. I've learned to recognize the signs now. Unusual animal behavior, missing hikers, traumatized survivors describing tall, gaunt figures with too many teeth. The pattern is spreading: northern Michigan, upstate New York, rural Maine. Small outbreaks that authorities attribute to isolated wilderness predators or disturbed human killers. Last week, in a small Montana diner, I overheard locals discussing the strange behavior of deer in the nearby national forest. How they move in unnatural synchronization, as if controlled by something else. That night, scanning regional news on a library computer, I found reports of a documentary filmmaker named Petra who had recently returned from New Zealand to shoot footage in this exact region. The article included her photo, gaunt-faced and hollow-eyed, nothing like the woman I'd known. It found her, and through her, it found me again. I'm writing this account in a motel room with the heat turned off despite the below-freezing temperature outside. My breath fogs in front of my face as I document what really happened in Nevada. Outside my window, 3 deer stand motionless in the parking lot, their heads turned in perfect unison toward my door. They've been there for hours, waiting with infinite patience. The Wendigo feeds not just on flesh, but on connection, the bonds between people that make us human. It uses those connections as a map, hunting through the network of relationships that sustain us. I've been running for so long, but I understand now that there's nowhere to hide from something that can follow the invisible threads linking one person to another. A few minutes ago, my phone rang for the first time in months. I don't remember giving this number to anyone. When I answered, I heard Eleanor's voice, not the distorted howl of the Wendigo, but her normal academic tone, explaining that she and Lucas miss me terribly. "They're just outside," she said. "They're so hungry. Wouldn't I please open the door?" There's a scratching at my window now, not claws, but fingers. Long, jointed fingers tapping a patient rhythm. The glass fogs not from my breath, but from something else's, something that whispers my name in the voice of friends long dead. I won't open the door, but I know I'm not strong enough to resist forever. The hunger that drove Eleanor into the snow will eventually consume me too. Not because I'll give in to cannibalism, but because loneliness and isolation are their own forms of starvation. The Wendigo understands this better than anyone. If you're reading this, it means one of two things. Either I've found the strength to end this cycle, to destroy my own body before it can become another vessel, or I've finally opened the door. If it's the latter, then watch for me in crowds. I might look normal at first glance, but you'll know me by my hollow eyes and patient smile. And if you recognize me, run, because the hunger never sleeps, and it remembers everyone it meets. Dust swirled around my tires as I pulled my beat-up Jeep onto the highway, leaving Reno behind. I'm Harlan Voss, 32 years old, born and raised in Boise, Idaho. City life's fine, but I've always been a sucker for the wild. Camping, fishing, you name it. This trip was my shot to unplug, just me and the Nevada wilderness near Great Basin National Park. I'd heard stories about the place, whispers of weird stuff in the mountains, but I shrugged it off. Just campfire tales, right? My buddy Quentin, a wiry guy with a knack for bad jokes, was supposed to come, but he bailed last minute. Something about a work emergency. So, it was just me, my gear, and a playlist of old rock tunes. The road stretched endless, sagebrush blurring past. I'd planned this for weeks, mapping out a spot by Wheeler Peak. It's remote, no cell service, perfect for disappearing. I packed light, tent, sleeping bag, a cooler with some burgers and beer. My old hunting knife, a gift from my dad, sat snug in my pack. Never needed it for more than cutting rope, but it felt good to have. The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange. I cracked the window, letting the desert air hit my face. Felt free, like I could breathe for the first time in months. Nevada's got this eerie vibe, you know? Like the land's watching you. I brushed it off as road trip jitters. My GPS beeped, guiding me off the main road onto a dirt path. Signs pointed to the park, but the deeper I went, the quieter it got. No cars, no people, just me and the crunch of gravel. I thought about my sister, Mara, back in Boise. She'd called me crazy for going solo. "What if something happens?" she'd said. I laughed it off, told her I'd be fine. Famous last words, huh? The Jeep rattled over rocks, and I spotted my campsite. A flat clearing nestled between pines and jagged cliffs. Perfect. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out. Air was crisp, smelled like sap and earth. I stretched, feeling the ache from hours of driving. Sun was almost gone now, just a sliver above the peaks. I figured I'd set up camp quick, get a fire going. Nothing like a burger cooked over flames to kick things off. Unloading my gear, I thought about Quentin again. Guy's a mess, but he's got stories. Claims he saw something freaky in these parts years ago. Never gave details, just got this look, like he'd seen a ghost. I chuckled, hauling my tent bag, probably just pulling my leg. I dropped the bag, unzipped it, and started staking the ground. The rhythm of it, hammer, stake, repeat, was soothing. Made me feel like I was in control, like this was my turf. Sky turned purple as I worked. I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting a deer or something to pop out. Nothing did. Just stillness. Too still, maybe. I shook it off, blaming the long drive. My cooler sat by the Jeep, and I grabbed a beer, popping the cap. First sip hit like a charm. I leaned against the hood, taking in the view, mountains looming like giants. The place felt alive in a way I couldn't pin down. I got the tent up, tossed my sleeping bag inside. Fire was next. I gathered sticks, some dry brush, and piled them in a ring of stones I'd found nearby. Matches were in my pocket, old habit from Boy Scouts. I struck one, watched the flame catch. Firelight danced, warming my hands. Felt good, like I'd carved out a little piece of home in the middle of nowhere. I sat back, sipping my beer, staring into the flames. The stars were out now, millions of them, sharp against the black. I've seen skies like that before, but this one felt heavier, like it was pressing down. I pulled out my phone, no bars, just like I wanted. Total disconnect. I grinned, thinking how jealous Mara would be when I told her about this spot. She's more of a hotel girl. Me? Give me dirt and a fire any day. As I tossed another stick on the fire, something shifted in the distance. Not a sound, exactly. More like a feeling, like the air got thick. I froze, scanning the trees. Nothing but shadows and starlight. My heart picked up, just a tick, but I laughed it off. Get a grip, Harlan, I muttered, shaking my head. Probably just the horror stories Quentin planted in my brain. I grabbed another beer, ready to settle in for the night. Firelight flickered across the clearing, and I sipped my beer, trying to shake that weird feeling from earlier. The Nevada night was cold now, biting through my jacket. I tossed another log on the fire, sparks popping like tiny fireflies. My tent sat a few feet away, looking flimsy against the massive pines. I'd camped solo before, but something about this spot near Wheeler Peak felt off. Like the darkness was thicker than it should be. I brushed it aside, figuring it was just me being jumpy after Quentin's dumb stories. I grabbed my cooler, ready to cook up a burger. Opened it, and, great, half the ice had melted, soaking the buns. Real nice, Harlan, I grumbled, fishing out a soggy pack. I could have sworn I'd sealed it tight back in Boise. Rookie mistake. I salvaged what I could, skewering a patty on a stick to roast over the flames. The sizzle was comforting, grounding. Still, I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting something to stare back. While the burger cooked, I pulled out my map, spreading it on the ground. The fire lit up the paper, trails snaking through Great Basin National Park. I'd planned a hike tomorrow, maybe up to Stella Lake. But the map was old, creased from years in my glove box. Some trails looked faded, like they hadn't been used in forever. I traced one with my finger, wondering if I'd bitten off more than I could chew coming out here alone. Mara's voice echoed in my head. You're nuts, Harlan. The burger was done, charred but edible. I took a bite, leaning back against a rock. That's when I noticed my Jeep's dome light was on. Weird, I hadn't touched it since parking. I stood, brushing crumbs off my jeans, and walked over. Door was shut tight, no reason for the light to be glowing. I opened it, clicked the switch off, and checked the battery. Seemed fine. Just a glitch, I told myself, but my gut twisted. Horror movies start like this, don't they? Little things going wrong. Back at the fire, I tried to relax, but the air felt heavy again, like before. I scanned the clearing, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing, just pines and rocks. I laughed it off, nerves, right? But then I saw it. My tent zipper was halfway down. I'd zipped it shut after tossing my bag in, no question. Wind, maybe? Except there wasn't any. My pulse kicked up, and I walked over, zipping it back up slow, like I was waiting for something to jump out. I sat by the fire again, closer this time, knife in my pocket just in case. The night was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, just my own breathing. I thought about Bigfoot, those old Nevada tales Quentin loved. He'd sworn something huge had crossed his path out here once, back when he was a kid. I'd laughed, called him full of it. Now, sitting alone, those stories didn't seem so funny. I gripped my beer tighter, eyes darting to the shadows. My phone was useless, no signal, just a brick. I shoved it in my pack, wishing I'd brought a radio or something. The fire was dying, and I didn't feel like hunting for more wood. I decided to turn in, get some sleep, shake off this creepy vibe. I crawled into the tent, knife by my side. Zipped the flap tight, double-checked it. The sleeping bag was cold, but I burrowed in, trying to focus on tomorrow's hike, not the weirdness piling up. Lying there, I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching. Not like a person, but bigger. I told myself it was just the isolation messing with me. I'd been in worse spots, lost in the sawtooths once, nearly froze. This was nothing. Still, I kept my hand on the knife, listening hard. The night stayed silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, like something's holding its breath. I must have dozed off, because I jolted awake, heart hammering. No idea why, just pure instinct. I lay still, ears straining. Nothing. But the air in the tent felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, half expecting to see something horrible. Just nylon walls and my own shadow. I let out a shaky laugh, but my hands were sweating. Whatever was out there, it wasn't showing itself. Not yet. Morning light barely crept through the pines when I unzipped my tent, my breath fogging in the chilly Nevada air. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, max, after that jolt in the night. My neck was stiff, and my knife was still clutched in my hand. The campsite looked normal, fire pit smoldering, Jeep parked where I left it, but the vibe was all wrong. Like the world was holding its breath. I shook it off, chalking it up to a rough night, and grabbed my stove to boil water for coffee. Needed something to kick the fog out of my brain. I sipped the coffee, burning my tongue, and scanned the clearing. My burger mess from last night was gone. Plate, scraps, all of it. Not scattered like an animal got it, just gone. My stomach twisted. Raccoons don't clean up like that. I walked over to where I'd left the cooler. Lid was shut, but when I opened it, the rest of my food, hot dogs, some apples, was missing. Just empty bags and melted ice. What the hell? I muttered, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. I checked the Jeep next, thinking maybe I'd misplaced stuff. Everything was there: map, clothes, spare gas can. But the driver's side mirror was cracked, spiderwebbed like something heavy hit it. I ran my finger over the glass, heart picking up. No way that happened on the drive. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking. Just trees, endless trees. The horror of it hit me slow. This wasn't random. Something was messing with me. I decided to hike to Stella Lake, clear my head. Packed light, water, knife, a granola bar I found in my bag. The trail started narrow, winding up through rocks and scrub. I kept looking back, feeling eyes on me. You know that prickle, like when you're a kid and swear the closet's got a monster? Yeah, like that, but worse. I laughed it off, muttering, Bigfoot's not real, Harlan. But Quentin's story kept creeping in. Him swearing he saw something tall, hairy, moving fast near these peaks. About a mile in, I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. A footprint, big as a dinner plate, pressed deep into the dirt. Not a bear, not human. Too long, too wide, with weird toe marks. My chest went tight. I knelt, touching the edge. Fresh, maybe hours old. I told myself it was a prank, some park weirdo having fun. But out here, nobody for miles. The air felt heavy again, like it was pushing me down. I kept moving, faster now, trail getting steeper. The trees thinned, giving me a view of the valley. Beautiful, but it didn't calm me. I heard a snap, sharp, like a branch breaking. I froze, scanning the ridge. Nothing. Then another snap, closer. My knife was out before I realized it, blade catching the sunlight. Who's there? I called, voice shaky. No answer, just that creepy silence. I felt like prey, like something was sizing me up. Backtracking seemed smart, so I turned, heart hammering. That's when I saw the shape, tall, dark, half hidden behind a boulder maybe 50 yards off. Not a bear, not a man. It moved, smooth and quick, ducking out of sight. My legs went weak. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light. But deep down I knew better. This was real, and it was bad. Horror stories don't prepare you for that gut punch of seeing something impossible. I hustled down the trail, tripping over roots, my pack bouncing. The campsite wasn't far, but every step felt like I was being watched. I kept the knife out, useless as it seemed. When I hit the clearing, my tent was trashed, holes snapped, nylon shredded. The Jeep was fine, thank God, but my fire pit was scattered, rocks flung like toys. Whatever did this wasn't small. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, mind racing. Stay or go. I wasn't thinking straight. I climbed into the Jeep, locked the doors, and sat there, gripping the wheel. The sun was high now, but it didn't feel safe. I kept picturing that shape, those prints. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever. Those old Nevada tales were screaming in my head. I started the engine, then stopped. My gear was everywhere, and I didn't know the trails well enough to drive out blind. Panic was setting in, and I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone out here. Something was closing in. The Jeep's engine roared as I floored it, tires spitting gravel. My trashed campsite shrank in the rear view, but my heart was still jackhammering. I grabbed what I could: knife, map, half a water bottle, before bolting. That shape I saw, those prints, the shredded tent, it wasn't a prank. Something was out there, something huge, and it wasn't friendly. The dirt road twisted through pines near Wheeler Peak, and I prayed it'd lead me back to the highway. Nevada's backcountry doesn't mess around, and I was in deep. Branches scraped the Jeep's sides, the trail narrower than I remembered. My hands shook on the wheel, eyes flicking to the mirrors. Nothing but trees, yet I felt it. Eyes on me, like a predator waiting for me to slip. I thought of Mara, how she'd lose it if I didn't make it back to Boise. "Focus, Harlan," I hissed, swerving around a rock. The map was useless now, crumpled on the seat. I was driving blind, hoping for a sign of civilization. A thud hit the roof, hard enough to dent metal. I yelped, slamming the brakes. The Jeep skidded, dust clouding everything. I sat frozen, listening. Nothing, just my ragged breathing. I leaned out the window, squinting up. A massive branch lay across the hood, splintered like it had been thrown. No way it fell naturally. Trees don't toss their own limbs. My gut screamed to keep moving, but fear glued me to the seat. This was horror movie level bad. I eased off the brake, creeping forward. The trail dipped into a ravine, and I cursed my dumb luck. If I got stuck here, I was done. I pictured Quentin's face, his Bigfoot story no longer a joke. "You idiot, Harlan," I muttered, wishing I'd listened. Something moved in my peripheral, a blur, tall and dark, darting between trees. My chest tightened. It was keeping pace, stalking me. I gunned the engine, tires churning dirt, desperate to outrun whatever it was. The Jeep lurched over a rise, and I saw it. A faint glow of asphalt in the distance. The highway. Hope flared, but then the engine sputtered. No, no, no. I smacked the dash, glancing at the gas gauge. Half a tank, plenty. So why was it dying? I pumped the pedal, coaxing it forward. Another thud rocked the Jeep, this time from the side. The passenger window cracked, webbing under some unseen force. I screamed, swerving, barely keeping control. I hit a straight stretch, flooring it toward the highway. Trees blurred past, but the thing was still out there. I felt it. My knife sat on the seat, useless against something that could dent steel. I thought of those Nevada legends, Sasquatch tearing through the wild. This wasn't a story anymore. It was real, and it wanted me gone. Or worse. The Jeep rattled, engine coughing, but I kept pushing, praying I'd make it out. The highway was closer now, maybe a mile. I could taste freedom, but then something slammed the rear, hard. The Jeep fishtailed, and I fought to steer straight. In the mirror, I saw it, just for a second. Massive, hairy, eyes glinting in the dusk. My blood ran cold. It wasn't human, wasn't animal. I leaned on the horn, hoping to scare it off, but it didn't flinch. The Jeep groaned, losing power, and I knew I was running out of time. I crested a hill, asphalt gleaming under my headlights. The engine was barely alive, but I coaxed it forward, every second of fight. The thing was behind me. I could hear it now, crashing through brush, heavy steps shaking the ground. My hands were slick with sweat, slipping on the wheel. I didn't dare look back. The highway meant safety, people, a way out of this nightmare. I just had to hold on a little longer. I hit pavement, tires squealing, and for a moment, I thought I'd made it. The crashing stopped, the air less heavy. I laughed, shaky, tears stinging my eyes. "You're okay, Harlan," I whispered, glancing at the mirror. Nothing but road and dusk. I eased off the gas, letting the Jeep coast, my pulse slowing. I'd escaped the horror, or so I thought. The night wasn't done with me yet. The Jeep limped along the highway, engine wheezing like it was on its last breath. I kept my eyes glued to the road, the Nevada desert stretching black around me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every shadow made me flinch. I'd seen it, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever, and it nearly got me. The highway felt like a lifeline, but I wasn't safe yet. My phone was still dead, no way to call for help. I needed a gas station, a town, anything to prove I wasn't alone out here. I spotted a faint light ahead, a diner, neon sign flickering. Relief hit me like a wave. I pulled into the gravel lot, the Jeep coughing as I parked. The place was run down, but warm light spilled from the windows. I grabbed my knife, just in case, and stumbled inside. A waitress, maybe 50, looked up from her crossword. "You okay, Han?" she asked, eyeing my torn jacket. I forced a smile, muttering something about car trouble, and slid into a booth. Coffee burned my throat as I sipped, trying to piece it together. That thing had chased me, wrecked my Jeep, my camp. Why? I thought of old folklore, Bigfoot as a guardian or a hunter. Maybe I'd trespassed, pissed it off. The waitress refilled my cup, and I asked, casual as I could, if she'd heard of weird stuff in the park. Her face tightened. Folks see things out there, she said, voice low. Best not to go poking around. My stomach dropped. I paid and headed back to the Jeep, feeling eyes on me again. The lot was empty, but the dark beyond the diner felt alive. I checked the engine, wires torn, like something clawed them. No way that was random. I cursed, slamming the hood. My only shot was to wait till morning, hitch a ride. I locked myself in the Jeep, knife in hand, and tried to stay calm. The horror wasn't over. I could feel it lurking, waiting for me to slip up. Hours dragged, and I dozed off, slumped in the driver's seat. A tap on the window snapped me awake. Nothing there, just stars and sagebrush. My heart raced. I clicked the flashlight, sweeping the lot. Empty. But then I saw it. Scratches on the door, deep, fresh. Not bear claws, too precise. I gripped the knife, breath shallow. I'd made it to the highway, but this thing wasn't done. It had followed me. I started the Jeep, praying it'd hold. The engine caught, barely, and I pulled onto the road, diner shrinking behind me. I didn't know where I was going, just away. The scratches, the chase, it all screamed one thing. I wasn't escaping. I thought the highway was safe, my big mistake. You don't outrun something that old, that angry. I kept driving, eyes burning, waiting for the next sign it was close. Mile after mile, the road stayed empty. I let myself hope, just a flicker. Maybe it had given up. Then the headlights caught something. Eyes, red and huge, glinting from the brush. I swerved, tires screeching, and the Jeep fishtailed. The wheel jerked from my hands, and I saw it again, closer, looming on the shoulder. My scream cut off as the Jeep flipped, world spinning, glass, metal, pain. I thought I could run. I was wrong. Darkness took me, but not before I heard it. Heavy steps, circling the wreck. I tried to move, to fight, but my body wouldn't listen. Blood stung my eyes, and the knife was gone, lost in the crash. I'd come to Nevada for peace, for a break from the grind. Instead, I'd found something ancient, something that didn't forgive trespassers. My last thought was of Mara, how she'd never know what got me. The desert went quiet, swallowing my wreck like it never happened. Nevada keeps its secrets, and I'd learned one the hard way. Bigfoot wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was out there, waiting for the next fool to cross its path. I'd made my mistake, and it cost me everything. The horror didn't end with me. It was just getting started. The tires of my old pickup hummed as I crossed the Nevada state line, the desert opening up like a promise. I'm Delphine Carver, 29 years old, from Missoula, Montana. Born in the shadow of the Rockies, I've always chased wide open spaces, places where the world feels bigger than your problems. This trip was my escape, a solo camping gig near Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest. Work's been a grind, and I needed to breathe, you know? Just me, my tent, and a sky full of stars. My cousin Lyle was going to tag along, but he flaked, said his truck broke down. So, it was just me, rattling down the road with a cooler and a beat-up guitar. Sunset painted the mountains pink as I turned off the highway, following a dirt track into the forest. I'd picked a spot by the Reese River, far from the crowds. Remote, quiet, no bars on my phone. Exactly what I wanted. My pack held the basics: sleeping bag, stove, a flashlight my dad swore by. I'd brought a journal, too. Figured I'd scribble some thoughts, maybe a song. The air was warm, sage-scented, and I cracked the window, letting it wash over me. Felt like I was shedding a skin I didn't need. I've camped plenty, Glacier, Yellowstone, but Nevada's got a different feel. Lonely, but not empty, like it's waiting for something. I shook off the thought, blaming the long drive from Missoula. My radio fritzed, cutting to static, so I switched it off. Silence was better anyway. The road got rougher, my pickup bouncing over ruts. I grinned, thinking how my friend Sadie would hate this. No Wi-Fi, no coffee shops. She'd called me reckless for going alone. What if you get lost, she'd said. I'd laughed, told her I'd be fine. The campsite was a clearing by the river, cottonwoods leaning over like they were whispering. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out, boots crunching gravel. Air was cooler now, sharper. I stretched, working out the kinks from 8 hours behind the wheel. The river gurgled nearby, low and steady. Perfect spot, I thought, unloading my gear. Tent, cooler, a folding chair I'd had since college. I felt like a kid again, setting up my own little world. I got the tent up quick, hammering stakes with a rock. Sun was gone, just a purple glow left. I dug out my stove, craving hot dogs roasted over a fire, but I'd save that for tomorrow. Tonight was about settling in. I lit a lantern, its hiss filling the quiet. My guitar leaned against the chair. I'd play later, maybe something moody to match the desert. For now, I just wanted to soak it all in, let the stress of Missoula fade. The stars popped out, brighter than I'd expected. I sat in my chair, sipping water, watching them glitter. No light pollution, no noise, just pure, clean dark. I thought about Lyle, how he'd love this view. Guy's a talker, always spinning yarns about weird stuff, ghost towns, creatures in the woods. I chuckled, remembering his dumb grin. He'd probably say this place was haunted. Me? I was just happy to be here, alone with the night. I started a small fire, stacking twigs in a teepee. The crackle was comforting, like an old friend. I tossed on a bigger log, sparks swirling up. My journal sat in my lap, but I didn't write yet. Just stared at the flames, letting my mind wander. The river's murmur blended with the fire, and for a moment, everything felt right. Like I belonged here, you know? I leaned back, savoring it. Then the air shifted, not a breeze, but a weight, like someone stepped into the room. I sat up, scanning the trees. Nothing but shadows dancing in the firelight. My pulse ticked up, just a bit. Chill, Delphine. I muttered, laughing at myself. Probably just the solitude messing with me. I'd heard stories about Nevada, odd lights, strange disappearances, but I wasn't buying it. Still, I checked my flashlight, made sure it worked. I tossed another log on, sparks flaring. The night was deep now, wrapping the clearing tight. I grabbed my guitar, strummed a soft chord, letting it hum through the dark. Felt good, like I was claiming the space. But that heavy feeling lingered, just out of reach. I stopped playing, listening hard. The river, the fire, nothing else. Yet I couldn't shake it, like something was waiting, watching, right beyond the light. I woke up shivering, my sleeping bag damp with morning dew. The fire was dead, just gray ash in the pit. My tent flap was unzipped, flapping loose, which was weird. I'd sealed it tight before crashing. Crawling out, I rubbed my eyes, the Reese River sparkling under early light. The air felt sharp, too cold for Nevada in spring. I grabbed my jacket, trying to shake the uneasy vibe from last night. Something about this place was starting to feel off, like I'd overstayed my welcome. I checked my pickup. Locked, no issues, but my cooler was tipped over, lid cracked open. Hot dogs and bread were scattered, half-eaten, like something rifled through but didn't finish. Not bears, they'd have torn it all apart. My stomach nodded. I cleaned up, muttering, probably just a coyote, Delphine. But it didn't feel right. I thought of Lyle's dumb stories, creatures that steal food, not for hunger, but to mess with you. I pushed it down, focusing on coffee. The stove wouldn't light. Kept clicking, no flame. I checked it in Missoula, worked fine. Come on, I growled, shaking it like that'd help. Finally got a weak spark, enough to heat water. Sipping bitter coffee, I noticed my journal was gone from the chair. Found it by the riverbank, pages wet, like it had been tossed. My handwriting was still there, but the ink was smudged, unreadable. I frowned, glancing around. No wind last night, no way it moved itself. I decided to stick around, not let weirdness ruin my trip. Planned a short hike along the river, maybe clear my head. Packed my flashlight, knife, and water, leaving the guitar in the tent. The trail was faint, overgrown with sagebrush. I kept tripping, distracted, replaying last night. That heavy air, the silence. You ever get that feeling, like you're not alone but can't prove it? Yeah, it was like that, nagging me with every step. Half a mile in, I found my chair, or what was left of it. The folding one from camp, now twisted metal and shredded fabric, dumped in a thicket. My breath caught. No animal does that. I backed up, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but the hairs on my neck stood up. I thought of Sadie, how she'd say I was crazy for not bailing now. but I'd driven from Montana for this. Quitting felt like letting the creepy vibes win. I hustled back to camp, heart pounding. My tent was fine, but my fire pit was scattered, rocks flung wide, like someone kicked it apart. I froze, gripping my knife. "Who's out there?" I called, voice shakier than I liked. No answer, just the river's murmur. Horror stories flooded my mind. Wendigo tales Lyle loved, about spirits that stalk the wild. I laughed it off, but it sounded forced, even to me. I checked the pickup again, needing something solid. Keys were in my pocket, but the driver's door wouldn't open, lock jammed. I cursed, circling to the passenger side. That's when I saw scratches on the hood, shallow but long, like nails dragged slow. Not deep enough for a tool, too neat for claws. My pulse raced. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there, staring at the scratches. This wasn't random. Something was toying with me. I thought about packing up, hitting the road. But my gear was spread out, and the sun was high. Plenty of daylight left. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe kids were pranking campers, right? Except I hadn't seen a soul since the highway. I grabbed my flashlight, checked the batteries. Worked fine now, but I kept it close. The idea of staying another night felt dumb, but so did driving off without my stuff. The day dragged, and I kept busy. Rebuilt the fire pit, secured the cooler. Every rustle made me jump, every shadow looked wrong. By dusk, I was wired, knife in my pocket, flashlight in hand. I sat by the tent, watching the trees. The air got that heavy feel again, like a storm brewing, but the sky was clear. I strummed my guitar to calm down, but the notes felt hollow, swallowed by the dark. Something was out there, and it wasn't just in my head. Firelight flickered as I sat by my tent, clutching my knife, the Nevada night closing in tight. The river's murmur was the only sound, but it didn't soothe me. After finding my chair wrecked and those scratches on the pickup, I couldn't pretend this was nothing. My guitar lay quiet. I'd stopped playing when the air turned heavy again, like it was pushing me down. I scanned the trees, flashlight beam shaky in my hand. You ever feel like the dark's alive? That's where I was, heart thumping, waiting for something to break the silence. I stood to check the fire, tossing on a stick. That's when I saw it. A shape across the river, tall and thin, crouched low. Not a deer, not a person. Its outline was wrong, all angles and limbs, like a stick figure stretched too far. I froze, breath caught. The flashlight beam hit it, and it flinched, eyes glinting yellow for a split second before it melted into the trees. My legs wobbled. Just a coyote, I whispered, but I knew better. That was no animal. I backed toward the pickup, keeping the light on the riverbank. Nothing moved, but the air felt colder, sharper, like it was biting my skin. I thought of Lyle's Wendigo stories, cannibal spirits, all hunger and hate, stalking lone travelers. He'd laugh, say they were just tales, but out here, alone, they felt real. I climbed into the cab, locking the doors, knife on my lap. The scratches on the hood glowed under my flashlight, mocking me. Whatever was out there wasn't done. I tried the engine. Nothing. Not a click, not a sputter. Battery was fine yesterday, no reason for it to die. My stomach sank. I popped the hood, hands shaking, and checked the cables. One was sliced clean, like with a blade, not chewed or frayed. Horror hit me hard. This wasn't random vandalism. Something wanted me stuck. I slammed the hood, scanning the dark. The trees felt closer, like they were leaning in, watching. I grabbed my pack, thinking I'd hike out, find the highway. But my map was gone, vanished from the seat. I cursed, digging through my stuff. Found my journal instead, opened to a blank page with one word scratched in, hungry. Not my writing, jagged, deep, like it was carved. My blood ran cold. I dropped it, backing against the pickup. You know that moment in scary movies where the character realizes they're screwed? Yeah, that was me, right then. A low sound started, not a growl, more like a moan, drifting from the trees. It wasn't loud, but it crawled into my bones, making my teeth ache. I swung the flashlight, beam cutting shadows. The moan stopped, then came again, closer, from a different spot. My chest tightened. I thought of running, but where? The river, the forest, it was all its territory now. I gripped the knife, useless as it felt against something that could slice wires. I scrambled to the tent, thinking I'd grab my gear and bolt. Inside, my sleeping bag was shredded, stuffing spilling like guts. My guitar was snapped in half, strings curled like dead snakes. I choked back a sob. This thing wasn't just stalking, it was destroying everything I had. I stuffed my flashlight and water bottle in my pack, hands clumsy. The moan came again, right outside, so close I felt it in my chest. I zipped the tent shut, like that'd help. Crouched in the dark, I listened, every nerve screaming. The moan turned into a whisper, not words, just a hiss, circling the tent. My flashlight flickered, then died, even though I checked the batteries. I fumbled for my knife, holding it like a lifeline. Something brushed the tent wall, slow and deliberate, dragging along the nylon. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. The horror was real now, no denying it. Something evil was out there, and it knew I was trapped. I waited, seconds stretching like hours, until the brushing stopped. Silence hit, worse than the noise. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there, knife shaking in my grip. My mind raced, stay or run. The pickup was dead, the tent useless. The highway was miles off, and I had no map, no light. I pictured that thing's eyes, yellow and wrong, and knew one thing. It wasn't human, wasn't natural. It was something old, something that belonged to this place, and I'd walked right into its jaws. I crouched in my ruined tent, knife shaking in my hand. The silence outside heavier than the moans had been. That thing, Wendigo, monster, whatever, was close, and I couldn't stay. My flashlight was dead, my pickup useless, and the Reese River's gurgle felt like a taunt. I slung my pack over my shoulder, heart slamming, and unzipped the tent slow, half expecting claws to rip through. Nothing, just stars and trees, but the air stung my skin, cold and wrong. I stepped out, boots soft on dirt, and bolted for the trail, praying I'd hit the highway before it found me. The forest swallowed me, branches snagging my jacket. I ran blind, tripping over roots, my breath loud in my ears. You ever run from something you can't see but feel? That's where I was, every step a gamble. I thought of Sadie, how she'd begged me not to come. Stupid, Delphine, I hissed, dodging a rock. The trail was gone, just endless pines, but I kept moving, hoping the river would guide me out of this horror show. A scream, not mine, tore through the dark, high and sharp, then cut off. I froze, chest heaving. It came from behind, where my camp was. Not human, not animal, like something tearing itself apart. My legs screamed to run, but I listened, knife out. Nothing followed, just that awful quiet. I pictured Lyle's Wendigo tales, how it mimics voices, lures you deeper. Was it calling me back? I shook my head, stumbling forward, the river my only map. Something snapped nearby, loud and close. I ducked behind a tree, heart in my throat. Heavy steps crunched, slow, circling. I held my breath, knife useless in my sweaty grip. The air turned sour, like rot and ash, choking me. I peeked out, saw it, just a glimpse. Tall, skeletal, skin gray and tight, eyes like holes. It swayed, head tilted, like it was sniffing me out. Horror locked my joints. I pressed against the bark, praying it'd pass. I waited, lungs burning, until the steps faded. Then I ran, harder than ever, branches whipping my face. Blood trickled from a cut, but I didn't stop. The river was louder now, a lifeline. I thought of my dad's flashlight, how he'd said it'd save me someday. Fat chance, busted when I needed it. My pack bounced, water bottle digging into my hip. If I could just reach the highway, find a car, I'd be okay, right? The ground dipped, and I slid into a gully, slamming my knee. Pain flared, but I scrambled up, mud caking my jeans. The river was close, sparkling under moonlight. I heard it again, those steps, faster now, crashing through brush. My name hissed through the trees, not Lyle's voice, not Sadie's, but mine, twisted and wrong. Delphine. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. It was playing with me, like a cat with a mouse. I hit the riverbank, water cold against my boots. The highway couldn't be far, had to be. I waded in, thigh deep, hoping to throw it off. The current tugged, but I pushed forward, knife still out. A splash behind me, too big for a fish. I didn't look, just ran, water slowing me down. My knee throbbed, my lungs burned, but I saw it. A glint of asphalt through the trees. Freedom, maybe, if I could just make it. The hissing stopped, replaced by a low rattle, like bones shaking. It was close, too close. I climbed the bank, slipping, and sprinted for the road. Something grazed my pack, tearing the strap. I screamed, throwing myself forward, pavement scraping my hands as I hit the highway. A truck's headlights flared in the distance, growing closer. I waved, frantic, but the rattling followed, right at my heels. I didn't dare look back. The truck screeched to a stop, door flying open. "Get in," a guy yelled, grizzled, maybe a ranger. I dove inside, slamming the door as he gunned it. My chest heaved, tears mixing with mud. The rattling faded, swallowed by engine noise, but I felt it. Those eyes, still out there, watching. I clutched my knife, babbling about the thing, the camp. The driver just nodded, face tight, like he'd heard it before. I thought I'd escaped, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The truck roared down the highway, Nevada's dark rushing past. I huddled in the passenger seat, knife still in my fist, my torn pack at my feet. The driver, Walt, said he patrolled these roads, seen weird stuff near the forest. He didn't laugh at my story, just kept driving, eyes flicking to the mirrors. My knee throbbed, my hands stung, but I was alive. Barely. I kept seeing that thing, gray skin, empty eyes, hissing my name. Wendigo, straight out of Lyle's creepy tales, and it had my scent. Walt dropped me at a gas station in Austin, neon buzzing in the night. I stumbled inside, grabbing a coffee, the clerk eyeing my muddy clothes. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded, too wired to talk. My phone was in my pack, cracked but working. No signal yet. I thought of calling Sadie, telling her I'd survived, but the words felt stuck. The horror wasn't gone. It was waiting. I could feel it, like a splinter under my skin. I sat in a booth, sipping coffee, trying to calm down. Walt had said to stay put. He'd get a tow for my pickup. I didn't tell him it was sabotaged, wires cut, tires slashed when I checked later. I kept replaying my mistake, camping alone, ignoring the signs. The journal's hungry. The moans, my guitar snapped like kindling. I thought I could handle the wild. Nope. Something ancient owned that forest, and I'd pissed it off. The clerk offered me a donut, probably feeling bad. I took it, barely tasting it. A trucker at the counter was talking, voice low, missing hikers, strange tracks near the river. I froze, coffee sloshing. He didn't know I was listening, but it hit me. I wasn't the only one it hunted. Wendigo stories always ended bad. People vanish, or worse, turn into it. I shivered, checking the windows. Just desert and stars, but I wasn't fooled. My phone pinged, finally a bar. I texted Sadie, "I'm okay, long story." Didn't send. What did I say? A monster chased me? She'd think I was nuts. I pocketed it, glancing at my pack. The knife was still there, streaked with mud. I thought of going back for my stuff, fixing the pickup. Dumb idea, but I needed my gear, my life. Walt said he'd check the camp tomorrow. I should have told him to burn it all. Hours later, Walt called the station's landline. My pickup was gone. Towed. He guessed, but the camp was trashed, worse than I'd left it. "Stay away from there," he said, voice grim. I nodded, though he couldn't see. I thanked the clerk, grabbed my pack, and hitched a ride with a trucker heading east. The road stretched dark, and I kept my knife close, eyes on the trees. I thought I'd gotten away, but that rattle echoed in my head, faint but there. The trucker dropped me in Ely, at a motel. I checked in, locked the door, and sank onto the bed, still filthy. My knee was swollen, cut stinging, but I didn't care. I saw it every time I closed my eyes. That thing, leaning closer, hissing. I'd run, but I brought something back. My dreams that night weren't dreams. Cold whispers, my name again, hungry. I woke screaming, knife in hand, room empty. My mistake wasn't camping. It was thinking I could leave it behind. Next day, I caught a bus to Reno, then home to Missoula. Sadie met me, hugged me, asked what happened. I lied, said I'd crashed the pickup, got lost. She didn't buy it, but I couldn't talk. The knife stayed in my pocket, my pack untouched in my closet. I heard it sometimes, late at night, that rattle, soft, outside my window. I'd trespassed, and the Wendigo doesn't forget. I was alive, but not free. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on. But the news hit hard. Hikers gone missing near the Reese River, same spot. No bodies, just gear torn apart. I knew what got them. I should have warned someone, burned the camp myself. My silence let it hunt again. Nevada's wild holds its monsters close, and I'd left the door open. The horror wasn't mine alone anymore. It was loose, hungry, and I'd helped it feed.